All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll get started. Welcome. I am George Latimer, Westchester County Executive. I'm here with members of our executive team for the county administration. I'll introduce them to you in a second. We're here to have the second of three public forums on the topic of Westchester County Airport. We were looking for an American flag, could not find one. We're told there's one outside on the flagpole, so I would ask us all to stand up and look in the direction of those windows and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please remain standing for a moment of silence as we think of our young men and women deployed around the world. Please be seated. For those who are standing up around the side of the room, I see some open seats around the front here. I don't know if these have been spoken for. They are for legislators, okay. If there are any extra space for chairs, we certainly welcome trying to squeeze a few more chairs in. We are mindful that there are a number of exits from this room. The back doors do open outward, and there's ways to exit the room on this side behind me, both to my left and right, and then through the doors that you came in on should we need to evacuate the room in a hurry. I want to thank the town of North Castle. The town supervisor is here, and he'll say a few words in a few minutes. The Honorable Michael Shaliro and the members of the town board for making this room available to us here at the Hergenhan Center. And this is, as I said, the second of three public forums that we're having. We may hold some additional ones depending on the response as we go forward, but we wanted to make sure that the public had a chance to interact on issues that matter greatly as we make some decisions about the Westchester County Airport. Let me introduce a few of the people that are here, and then we'll go over a little bit of what the topic is. We'll see a brief outline of some of the topic areas and what we hope to get testimony about tonight. I'm joined by members of our executive team. Our Director of Operations, Joan McDonald, is with us here. And I have our County Attorney, John Nona. Our Commissioner of the Department of Public Works, which has supervisory responsibility for the Department or Division of Transportation under which the airport falls, Hugh Grecian. And we have our Director of Communications, Catherine Chaffee, with us. Our Chief of Staff on the County Executive's floor, Andrew Ferris, is with us tonight. And we have Susan Spear with our intergovernmental team. I've seen outside Aviva Meyer, Chloe Zung, Copper Crane, Bridget Gibbons, a number of other folks, all of whom are here to listen to the testimony, to try to incorporate, for our purposes, all of the different situations we've got. We're joined by, at least by my observation, three members of the town of North Castle Town Board. We're appreciative again of Supervisor Michael Shalero, who is with us here. Councilman Jose Berra is with us, and Councilman Barry Reiter. And thank you very much. We have Councilwoman Barbara Giacinto has joined us. Barbara, good to see you. Roles are a little reversed this time, but thank you again for your hospitality, and we look forward to listening to the testimony tonight. We are going to take public testimony up to 5 minutes for the speaker. If you have printed comments that you want to submit, you're welcome to submit it of any length. We'll give you an email address so you can follow up tonight with additional comments. If you don't have a printed copy available for us to have tonight, but you can make it available to us, we'll use it as part of the public record, and you're welcome to email it to us or hard copy mail it to us as you see fit. I want to announce in advance there will not be a second round of conversations, so when we go through the room, and we will stay here until the last person has had their say, however late that is, but if we need to have a continuation meeting, we'll do that. But we will not have a second bite around. So if we get to the end of the evening and everybody has had a chance to speak once and nobody else wishes to speak, that will end our dialogue for tonight. As I said, this is the third of three sessions. We had one last, the second of the three sessions, thank you. We had one last Wednesday night in the village of Rybrook where we talked about the topic of the master plan for the airport. Tonight's main topic is governance. The governance of the airport, how it should be governed. And we have a session scheduled for 2 weeks from tonight in West Harrison at the West Harrison Senior Center where we'll be talking about operations. Why do I divide them into three buckets? Because while they're interrelated at some level, each one needs a full, valid discussion. If we open it up to comments across the board, we may spend the whole night with people telling stories about how the airport is injurious to their health and their enjoyment of their property. That's important in terms of understanding the operations, but we may never get to discuss the master plan. Or if we spend every meeting talking just about governance, we may never talk about the operations needs. So we're imposing a little bit of discipline on you. We're not going to cut you off or redirect you, but we want tonight's topic to be about the governance of the airport. And I'll get into this in a little bit in just a second, but the issue about governance is one that has been raised in the last couple of years because my predecessor administration chose to propose to the Board of Legislators some specific changes in who would make decisions as to what happens to the county airport. So the issue of governance has been added to what was otherwise a discussion of master plan and discussion of the way the airport operates and how those operations impact or affect the people who live in and around the airport and under the flight plan of the airport. Now, I held off introducing the Board of Legislators because I knew we'd have some additional members joining us. So let me introduce, for recognition purposes, the Chairman of the Board of Legislators, the Honorable Ben Boykin, who represents White Plains and Scarsdale, part of West Harrison. He is joined tonight by the Majority Leader, representing Rye, Larchmont, Mamaroneck, other communities, Catherine Parker. The legislator who represents North Castle as well as neighboring Mount Pleasant, Margaret Kunzio, also has a piece of Greenberg. Legislator representing Mount Vernon, Lyndon Williams, is with us. Legislator representing a section of Greenberg, including river towns like Hastings and Dobbs Ferry, Mary Jane Shimsky. Legislator representing portions of New Rochelle, Eastchester, and the village of Tuckahoe, Damon Marr. We have Legislator Nancy Barr, who represents Rybrook, Portchester, and part of Harrison. Have I missed any members, Mr. Chairman? Have I gotten those who are here? We'll obviously introduce other electeds as they arrive. We're joined by a town councilman from the town of Harrison. Frank Gordon is with us. Frank, thank you for your attendance. And we will certainly recognize any other elected officials, and they're certainly welcome to testify as everybody else is in the process. The decisions to be made on the airport are jointly made by the executive branch and the legislative branch. Okay, I'm sorry. Our Deputy County Executive has joined us, the Honorable Ken Jenkins. So the decisions to be made on the airport are jointly to be made by the legislature and the executive branch. In being in office now for about 5.5 months, we wanted to make sure that the dialogue with the community was much more open than it has been in the past. A little over a month ago when I had a press conference laying out this proposal for how we were going to go about public contact, we also indicated that we were going to make changes to the Airport Advisory Board, which we have done. There are 4 new members that I've appointed, 3 of them at the direction of local governments, and a couple of new ex officio members as well. So there is a new configuration of people on the Airport Advisory Board, which is the ongoing outreach board of residents to interact with on these things. And as we had at the last meeting, as I mentioned, we talked about a master plan. We're not talking about the master plan specifically tonight, but to recap from the last meeting, the master plan was originally proposed in 2012 by my predecessor, received a grant of $1.4 million from the federal government. They established a deadline date for submission of a new master plan as of June 1st of this year. As of our taking office on January 1st, the master plan was not complete, did not have review by the Board of Legislators, did not have an environmental review. So as such, we asked for an extension. We have a very minimal extension until July 6th, which is an inadequate time to do the full master plan. So we will submit a version of a master plan to meet the requirements. We heard testimony at last week's meeting that will shape what we submit. So it won't simply be that which was done at the time of are taking office. What that document will look like will be subject to review that we've got to do. However, that is the beginning of the process, because we will continue on a master plan supplemental effort to try to have a more complete document that will have full review of the Board of Legislators and will have environmental review as well. So that was the last meeting we have. The next meeting coming up in 2 weeks will discuss operations, and that is the meeting at which we're going to delve more deeply into issues of flight path, noise monitoring, drainage, the impacts of pollution in the soil, that which may impact our drinking watershed, that which drains down the Blind Brook into Long Island Sound, and a host of any other issues, traffic, anything that people want to bring up. But tonight, the issue of governance is what is on the table as the primary topic of discussion. As I said, I'm not going to cut you off, but I really would appreciate it if you follow what we're laying out as a direction, because we think it's the most complete way to accomplish all of the things that we have here. I have been advised that some elected officials have sent representatives here. We have Emiliana Pugh, who's a representative of Senator Shelley Mayer, is with us, and Lisa Hoflick, who is a representative of United States Senator Kirsten Gillibrand, is with us tonight. And they will obviously share input to both of those two legislators. And a person who is the first former chairman of the Board of Legislators when it was created, unbelievably, 50 years ago, as of next year, was the election. He was the first person I ever voted for as an 18-year-old vote. The Honorable Herman Geist, who's a resident of North Castle, is with us. Herman, thank you for your long-term service. Herman has probably heard these discussions of the airport longer than any of us have, but it's now tasked to us to start to move forward on it. So with that thought in mind, we've covered some of the basic issues of the various public forums, what we're going to discuss tonight. Before we go further, when you've come in, you have the opportunity to sign up to speak. There's a table out front. If you have not signed up to speak and would like to speak, please do that. We're going to recognize people in order. You can't trade your time with anybody. This is not a marketable bartering economy. If we call your name and you're not here, but then you show up later, you'll go to the end of the line. We're not trying to be hardball, but we've got to follow some sort of a format of what we're doing. And when we do get to speaking, we're going to, as we do always, honor the chief elected official of the home community. In this case, Mr. Shalero will give the first testimony, and then we'll go to everybody else. We will listen to everybody's comments. And we have the full executive team here so that you know it's not just perfunctory. This is really going to be part of the decision-making that we have to make. So I'm going to try to, not give this a forever narrative here, but just to frame this, we have some slides which will cover some of this, and we are going to make it nice and cozy to watch. No popcorn, I'm sorry to report. But the issue in front of us in discussing the Westchester County Airport, in this particular case governance, is transparency. What has not happened in the past is a public discussion about whether we should or shouldn't change the matter of governance at the airport, and that's what today begins. In the next slide, I've mentioned already that there are 3 public forums that have been scheduled. One is done, this one, and then we have one more coming up in 2 weeks. I believe we have flyers outside if you want to take a copy of that. So the issue of governance is basically this. Who makes the decisions as to what happens at the airport, and what is the process by which we will, in the future, decide how to operate and function at the airport? We have had, in my judgment, a misnomer when we talk about privatizing the airport. The word privatization represents, in most people's minds, a partnership between a private sector and a public sector entity. Most people believe privatization takes some of the risk or the cost of a public facility and shares it with the private sector. And in many minds, that's a good thing to do. However, it also changes who makes the decisions. And when we discuss a facility like the airport, and most of the reasons why people are in this room are because they're concerned about the impacts of the airport, should we take it outside of the governing control of Westchester County, then these legislators and this executive team would cease to be able to make those decisions, and then some other entity would be the person or the entity that you would have to lobby to have changes or for advocacy and so forth. And that is really what is at stake here. Some of the topics that we consider: what's our current governance status? What are some of the types of airport governance models? This is not on a final examination. This is just to frame this out for you. some of the benchmark analysis, and then some of the considerations that are involved with governance. And these are elements to keep in mind as you give testimony, so that you have an idea of how this is all going to framework. Let us first talk about a timeline on governance. We have operated Westchester County Airport in a conventional fashion as a department of county government, which we have been given a certificate to operate by the Federal Aviation Administration. So the federal government is responsible ultimately for the control of the skies and the ground services. And while we may operate it in whatever fashion we would wish to, the FAA holds authority over a host of things that involves us. This is not like, we're running the bus system and we decide how many buses, what routes, based on what we think is serviceable. And I'm sure you can understand that, it's interstate travel, interstate commerce, so the federal government has its responsibility for superior control. For many years, the airport was operated by Westchester County, but the great conflict came in the early 1980s when the county government made the decision that the volume at the airport and the concerns about operations were such that it was intrusive to the neighbors, and so Westchester County imposed a curfew at the airport. The airlines took Westchester County to court, and in the ensuing court battle, the county was informed that it did not have the power to impose a curfew, but there was a settlement and a stipulation of settlement that gave two major protections within the control of county government to limit the commercial use of the airport. That's important to know because there's a commercial use and there's a general aviation use. And the general aviation use, individual pilots, corporate jets, things of that nature are not subject to the two elements of stipulation that governs the commercial side, meaning the scheduled flights by major airlines. Those two stipulation agreements, stipulation clauses had, number one, a limitation of the number of gates, 4 gates at the airport, and the number of gates limit how many airplanes can queue up. And then in addition to that limitation, a limitation of the number of passengers per half hour that could go through the airport on board, which would limit the volume, in essence, of the size of the planes, because you could only have 240 per half hour. With those two limitations, there have been a discussion about the protections against expansion of the airport that almost always focus on those two matters. However, in 2015, the county administration, our predecessor administration, was able to discover that provisions were made, I think in the mid-1990s, I want to say 1996, by the federal government that allowed a limited number of airports to seek a privatization governance model in which the airport would turn, or the government entity would turn over the operations to a private sector entity and could receive payment for that transferal of authority, so that the private sector entity would govern what happens, and based on their ability to make decisions that could be profitable for the entity, would then pay the ownership, in this case the county government, for a fee. That was the first time that there was an ability to draw significant money out of the profit of the airport. Prior to that, certain specific charges were considered acceptable for the county to receive on behalf of the airport, but the airport, which would produce profit at a much higher level, had that money left in a lockbox, and that lockbox was not available for the county to use for any other funding purpose. You know, if you have a department of town government, if your recreation department is cranking with fees and you have a tremendous amount of revenue coming in, more than that department needs, the extra revenue then goes to fund other parts of the town government. Not so with the airport. And in this case, there were these exceptions, and Westchester County, on realizing that they had the potential to apply for exception, did so. The county executive, my predecessor, presented to the Board of Legislators in November of 2016, in concert with the annual presentation of the budget, a plan to change the governance of the airport, called privatization, but change the governance of the airport for a single supplier, vendor, Oak Tree Capital, And in that particular proposal, there was a multiple year, and we'll see this in the next slide, a multiple year payout to the county spread out over 40 years. And over the 40-year period of time, Oak Tree Capital would run the airport. Now, currently, the airport is managed day to day by a private sector company, Avports. They manage it on behalf of the county with the contract to the county, but the county retains the authority to make certain decisions. So we pay Avports to manage the airport. It is already privatized. That's why I've changed the language in our conversation. It is already a privatized function. This is a different kind of relationship between the entity that would run the airport. More authority and power would be given to the entity, the private sector entity, so much so that they could make decisions, pricing parking at the airport and other ancillary services, whatever services could be made more financially viable. And with that thought in mind, the company would then be willing to pay the county. So it was a way to monetize the authority at the airport. That plan in December of 2016 was rejected by the Board of Legislators. They wanted a competitive process, not one single vendor submitted to the Board of Legislators. So they did not accept that deal in 2016. However, the budget for 2017, that's the budget that was decided in December of 2016, was built on $15 million of revenue from the plan. So it's kind of like putting a gun to your head and saying, okay, decide what you want, but depending on what you decide, I'm going to pull this trigger. And the financial situation was dealt with by going into reserve funds to offset the revenue. And the Board of Legislators decided they didn't want to be put into a position of making this decision under the duress of adopting a budget. And you have, round numbers, about 45 days between the submission of the budget proposal and the date that the adoption is due, if you want an on-time budget, and we have had on-time budgets at the county level of government. So there was a competitive process created for 2017. An RFP was issued in April of 2017. 3 bids were received in August of 17. There was a review process, and in changing the governance, the Astorino administration submitted a budget. Now we're talking about just last year, after the election was over. The prior administration submitted a budget that was predicated on accepting a deal with the preferred vendor, and a $20 million revenue stream was expected out of that, and the budget was predicated on the $20 million situation. I was not in county office at the time. I just finished running the race and becoming county executive-elect. The decision by the Board of Legislators, once again, was not to make this decision within a 45-day period of time, and not with a 40-year lease being tied to a huge amount of upfront money, $20 million, which would balance the budget. So once again, it was a decision being made under duress, and the Board of Legislators said that they did not want to do that. They did not accept that plan. Once again, we had to use reserve funds. And by the way, when you go into reserve funds, what are we talking about? You're going into your savings account. Now, you can go into your savings account and pay for your mortgage this month. You can go into your savings account, pay for your mortgage next month. At some point in time, the mortgage bills keep coming in, and you will go through your savings account. And that's exactly what the reserve funds represented. So with the new year, which is beyond this particular timeline, we'll go to the next slide if we would, we now have to deal with proposals that have been put out there in the past, and we have a decision to make as a legislature and as an executive branch, but not in the sole time frame of a budget. We are now having this conversation in June, not in November. The Board of Legislators are participating and listening to the public dialogue, and you, the public, for the first time, are brought into the dialogue so that you can express whether you think it's a good idea to change the governance of the airport. If so, for what type of reasons you would see fit. And in so doing, you have to look at what some of these proposals were. The 2016 Oak Tree proposal proposed that the county would receive $140 million over a 40-year period of time. And the first year of that proposal, which would have been for the 2017 budget, was a $15 million lump sum payment. And then the payments would shrink and flatten out. And then I think in the last 35 years of that 40-year time frame, the county would receive $2 million a year. So if my memory serves me correctly, it was 15, a couple of years of 10 or something like that, and then a whole bunch of twos leading out into a date 40 years from now when I don't expect to be on the planet. Macquarie proposal, which came in last year, was as a different proposal, and as you can see, it was a significantly higher proposal, both in payments and in capital commitment, and a much bigger lump sum payment in the first year, and this was what was structured into the budget. So, if the mission was to close any 1 year with a flat level revenue, and you did it by basis of a 40-year deal that was heavily upfront, had either of these two deals been accepted, there would have been a big drop-off in revenue in year 2 all the way out to year 40. So you can discuss it as a financial deal and have your comments and concerns, but all of this presumes that you will be turning over a significant portion of the decision-making, if not all of the decision-making, to a private sector entity. Next slide. And by the way, if anybody wants to comment, we can go back to any of these slides so you can reference them. So right now, where are we at? The county still owns the airport, still operates the airport. We operate it through a service contract with Avports, which is a private company. Avports was just recently proposed to be taken over by Goldman Sachs. There's an infrastructure investment entity. I assume it's an LLC that would take it over, and they would inherit Avport's existing contracts. No county tax levy dollars are currently used to support the airport. The airport pays about $11 million to the general fund to offset police costs. That's one of the few ways that money can be drawn out. And this is the governance structure that has been in place for the last 35 years. It is an enterprise fund, but it is a department of county government. Next slide. There are different models to look at. You can have government owned and operated. Enterprise fund, Department of Municipal Government, Airport Authority. Some airports in the country are owned by the county, the city, maybe the state, whatever it is. You have government owned with private operation, which is where we are right now, annual service contract, long-term management contract. And then you have the privately owned or operated ones, which is the one that was proposed over the last 2 budget cycles, in which there's a private entity that has a long-term operating lease and authority to make some decisions. These are different models of governance. Again, I know this stuff is dry, but this is where the decisions get made. And this is one of the reasons why I highlight that we have to talk about each topic in its own time frame, because and the legitimate anger that people have because planes go overhead. Repeating that particular story doesn't in and of itself help us get to deciding what decisions to make. And this is what public policy is. It's which path do we go? Do we maintain or do we change? And that's what we want to comment about tonight as the primary focus of our conversation. Next slide. I'm not sure what's coming next. This gives you some benchmarks of size and scope from other airports. If you've flown around the country, the only one up there that's a New York airport is MacArthur Airport over in Suffolk County. It shows you that we have more fixed-based operators than the other ones do. Our commercial operations at 15,000 is relatively small compared to the other operations at 153,000, and the total operations are competitive with some of these other airports around the country. And I've flown into some of them. San Jose and John Wayne Airport in Ontario County are not small little airports. This is the 3rd busiest airport in the state of New York. JFK and LaGuardia run 1 and 2. This airport is busier than Buffalo, Rochester, Syracuse, Albany, any of the other upstate cities, busier than Stewart, busier than any other New York State airport other than the first 2 I've mentioned. But the heavy usage of it is in general aviation. And that, of course, has not been the discussion over years and years. Most of the time, when we've had public policy discussions, it's been about the commercial side, the planned various airlines that are in business. Next slide. We're almost done. These are some of the considerations. I'll leave this up there, or we'll leave this up there. We'll go back and forth. I'll let Catherine determine, based on whatever the speaker says, what point we want to make. But I don't want to beat this to death, but I wanted to give you a bit of a framework as to what we're looking for in commentary tonight. You have the right to say whatever you want to say in whatever way you want to say it, but it's very important, I think, for all of us to start with the same basis of discussion. And tonight the question is, do we change the governance of who controls Westchester County Airport in order to receive a certain amount of money? And if we do, what type of model works? And if we don't, then we take governance off the table And we, the elected officials of the county, have to figure out how do we handle our financial responsibilities without the benefit of a revenue stream over and above from the airport. So at that long-winded, I'm sorry, I try to figure out how to make this stuff interesting. I don't know how to make it interesting, but it is important, and now we're hopefully on the same page. So with that thought in mind, we're going to invite our first commentary from the town supervisor from the town of North Castle, the Honorable Mike Shalero. Mike, thank you very much for having us in your house, and please feel free to share any comment that you have on behalf of the town of North Castle.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Good. I'm going to be very brief. First, I want to thank the county executive and his team and the county legislators for coming into our community and the affected communities. We appreciate you coming out and listening, as you said, to the people and not just doing this in board meetings. It means a lot to our communities. This is your meeting. This is not our meeting. We have enough meetings in this town, so that's why I'm going to be very brief. We're here really to listen, but it does give us an opportunity to just raise a couple of things for your staff, which may not be aware of what the town's position has been, and county legislators too that are new to the county. Our board and our town is very fact-based. That's the way we've always been. We have a very good bipartisan board, and that's the way we operate. And we look forward to the assessment of the materials that were received after all these hearings for our review, and then to foster our continued opinions on the further privatization of the airport. 5 very quick points that I want to make. One is, for those that aren't aware, a few years ago, our board passed a bipartisan resolution that we gave to the town, gave to the county, basically just saying that we want to be listed as an interested agency. So if we're an interested agency on anything related to the airport, Westchester County Airport, we just want to be made aware of it. We also made aware of 3 main points that are obvious, but just want to again reiterate from our standpoint as a community. Air traffic. We have made very public comments about resisting any further increase in air traffic, especially above the, I believe it's 240 seats per half hour on the commercial. There's been continued concern for noise, especially from private airlines, and which isn't in our resolution, but a continued or maybe improved adherence to private aircraft and their height above the ground, because we got a lot of complaints on low-flying aircraft. I think that needs to be monitored as closely as we possibly can. Obviously, pollution is a concern with any current or future operations at the airport. And also, an item that I mentioned at a committee meeting that I was invited to by our county legislator several years ago that I just want to reiterate tonight is any decisions that the county makes from the administrative level and the board level is not just focus on perhaps the proposed operator or the approved operator. Similar to what we do in zoning, when we make zoning decisions, we don't make them just based on who that applicant might be or who that operator might be, but thinking into the future of whatever you're approving, what those activities or operations could be that could be actually above what the current operator is proposing. That's all I have to say. I'm going to let everybody else speak. We're here to listen. What I will say, even though I breached some of the county executive's rules, because we're in our community, and I wanted to reiterate what our positions were. As somebody who runs meetings in this town every other week, I would recommend to listen to the county executive's instructions and follow the rules of this meeting, which is stick to the governance piece. And then there's plenty of time at the operations piece in West Harrison. And I thank you all again for coming to our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. Okay, our next speaker will be George Klein, and he will be followed by Susan. I can't quite read the last name. I want to say Laffer. Okay. She will follow Mr. Klein, and then Linda Fernberg will follow as the third speaker. Mr. Klein.
Thank you again for holding these meetings and being so transparent. It's really a great thing. It's a breath of fresh air compared to the last 8 years. I believe that the governance topic is the most fundamental of the 3 meeting topics, and therefore it's the most important. I guess the central question is, can rules be devised or protocols so that if authority is transferred to a private entity, so that that entity won't expand the airport? We think no, because there would be a very powerful financial incentive for any operator, any private operator, to expand operations. This just seems very, very obvious to us. We think that the control of the scale of the facilities is a critical determinant of air traffic, particularly in the general aviation portion, which is 80 or 85% of the current traffic. So we want that control to remain with the legislature and the administration. You are elected officials, and you're accountable to the citizenry, and we think it should stay that way. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Okay, the next speaker is Susan
Leifer.
Yep. Followed by Linda Fernberg and Millie Becker.
Hi. Thank you very much for a very clear and full explanation. George, I think it was very useful for all of us. I'm sorry. I'm going to reiterate part of what George Klein said. On a very personal level, if I see something happening to the airport, pollution or something dripping into if you have another layer, I can go to my legislator, I can go to the chief of the works department, but you are then going to have to reach out to the people who have privatized that airport, and so they don't get back to you, or they do get back to you, or the layers get bigger and bigger. And having been somebody who worked from the very beginning to get our first official regulations in the county, we went to the county for a resolution, we went to the legislator upstate for a resolution, the Senate for a resolution, and then came back to the county, and when that contract expired, the county itself made regulations. It makes us feel much, much different that I have you to talk to, I have you to tell, I have you to complain to. If you're going to put another layer between us and that, it's not going to feel the same way. And suppose I go to you and say something, and then you say, well, I have to go to them, and nothing happens. And I go back to you and you say, well, I spoke to them and they didn't get back to me yet. Or maybe you got too busy and couldn't speak to them. The sense of powerlessness is very, very important. And it's a big deal to have an airport so close to your water supply. It's a big deal to have housing that if you privatize the airport and it changes the value of the housing, you get less taxes anyhow. We're going to have to pay more taxes. So the thing that is very important is the connectiveness. I have always felt that I can come down and speak to the legislature. I've always felt that I could speak to my legislator. I don't want to lose that. I think that's a very, very important thing. And that's my pitch.
Thank you. We haven't run afoul of the clock yet, but I believe Chloe Zung is our timekeeper. Chloe, show us, in case you start to run late, there's a yellow caution sign, which does not mean speed up, and the red stop sign if you hit the 5-minute mark. But so far, so good.
Kind of like the Supreme Court. The lights
exactly like the Supreme Court. Linda Fernberg is our next speaker, and she will be followed by Millie Becker and legislator Margaret Kunzio.
County Legislator Latimer and members of the Legislative Board, thank you for having this meeting. We have, in the town of Armonk, I am an Armonk resident, have enjoyed recent years of transparency in our local government, and it makes a big difference to feel a part of decision-making. Even if in the end you don't win your point, it's still empowering. So to understand that the governance would change by privatizing the airport is incredibly concerning to me. We already have a problem with general aviation and the increase in flights, which can fly anytime. They are not subject to the curfew, and we don't know all the true ownership of these. Million Air just got rebuilt or built, revamped, whatever, and all these other private planes that fly in and out. And my understanding is the FAA has no real oversight on them. And they're not part of the stipulation of settlement and how when they can fly in and out, which causes apparently a lot of problems for us, and I'm sure I feel that myself. But I have to believe that if we go for a new privatization way of running the airport, that a for-profit company will want to, as you say, monetize this airport, and that can only mean more flights, more people flying. This is a strange little area up here in Westchester County. I grew up in Yonkers. I didn't even know it existed until I was past college. I didn't even know it was in New York. And now I live here, so it's part of my life. And the thought that giving a private entity, which would then allow no real redress by the surrounding community, is just something that I would hope never happens. As the last speaker pointed out, we elect you, we can come to you, we can ask for your help to help solve a problem. If the airport is privatized, I don't know. How do you even ask a big corporation to go and do something like that? Help change something. And if it's making money for them, they could probably care less. And finally, if you unlock that lockbox of money, I think that's almost an equally bad idea, because I'm from Yonkers, and I've seen money disappear in all different ways. As Supervisor Shalero on the board knows, I am mostly say the city of Hills where nothing's on the level. I've spent 20 years of my career there, so I was born and raised there, and I only live in Armonk, well, now half my life. But I think it's just a really terrible idea to allow other parts of the government to then maybe spend money out of the lockbox. It's just, I'm against the entire idea. We're a almost rural community that has the third largest airport in the state, so we don't need it to be bigger, or bigger, or more planes, or more passengers. Thank you.
Thank you. Just for the record, since I represent the whole county, I really like Yonkers. I think it's a good place.
I do too.
The next speaker is Millie Becker, and she will be followed by legislator Margaret Kunzio and then Nick Hartman.
Good evening, County Executive and officials. My name is Millie Becker, and I'm an aviation business owner at HPN for over 30 years. I'm a resident of Pound Ridge, and yes, I hear the airplanes in my garden when I'm outside. Westchester County Airport has a rich history and legacy dating back to World War II and the old Quonset hut that until 1993 was our main terminal. I worked in that Quonset hut, processing passengers, managing the ramp, and boarding flights. It was during that experience that I began to learn about the unique character of Westchester County Airport. Since the 1950s, Westchester Airport has been home to American companies that have based their flight departments at the airport. Pepsi, IBM, JP Morgan, Citigroup, Macy's, and others who are proud members of the National Business Aviation Association that represents the interests of general aviation in the United States and globally. The NBAA serves general aviation, and it estimates that for every corporate departure, 8 jobs touch that flight. Through the years, these companies have hired local talent from the light general aviation community. Young people who were fueling and parking airplanes are now corporate aviation leaders and pilots. These companies also give generously to support the local non-for-profit charities at many events. In 1993, the county and the community gave us a new terminal, which today is obsolete. The terminal is pre-9/11 and needs upgrades to accommodate the new security regulations and realities. Today's ticket counters are being replaced by check-in kiosks and luggage systems that can actually function without accidents. Our airport is special and deserves special attention, upgrades, and modifications to operate to meet the needs of today's passenger while guarding the quality of life for the community. So here we are, 25 years later, and the terminal today needs better facilities like enhanced passenger boarding areas, upgraded concessions and restaurants, and a new baggage system. All of this can be accomplished without expansion, but it will require resources and capital. But the solutions are not just financial. The county and its residents would benefit from a relationship that brings qualified global aviation managers to the table. All the objections raised by the community in the past year can be resolved and addressed by professional, experienced managers with the resources to make the investment in the airport, while the ultimate decisions on any improvements are controlled by the county. The county's vision for the airport should include a plan to strike a balance between the stakeholders to maintain the quality of life while managing the environmental impact on the community, increasing operational performance, upgrading the infrastructure, and enhancing the passenger experience, while increasing noise abatement initiatives. Environmental improvements, passenger airline, and general aviation enhancements can all be done without expansion. The proposed plan for privatization is a lease. It is not a sale. The county would remain the owner and landlord, and as in most cases, the leases, the tenant needs the landlord's approval for many things. The county would still control virtually any improvement or modification to the facility on multiple levels, first as a landlord, second as a lawmaker, and third as the agency required to review and ultimately grant any land use approval. The county airport is a jewel that is enjoyed by many generations of residents who use it to visit families, travel to schools, learn to fly, or just come and watch the planes take off. The airport plays a vital role in attracting businesses and residents. We should not allow the fear of what might happen to keep us from maintaining a safe, efficient airport that will benefit all the residents of Westchester County for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, please, no comments outside there. Come on. Let's show respect to every speaker so that you in turn will receive respect when you speak. Legislator Margaret Kunzio is our next speaker, followed by Nick Hartman and Warren Gottlieb.
Thank you very much. I want to thank you for holding these meetings. As most people know, the code for the airport is HPN, Harrison, Purchase, and North Castle. Most people don't realize that North Castle does have a small piece of the airport. I come in with a different perspective. Growing up here, this is my hometown, and as a little girl, my father used to take me up to the airport and literally without fences or anything, just drive up, sit there and watch the planes take off after getting a hot dog on 120. But here, I think, is an important piece. I know that I'm here to listen as well as my colleagues. Communication really is the key, and I think the transparency is something that we need to take very seriously. I look around the room, and I'm very impressed with the amount of people, but I also know, as Susan can attest to, that I've spoken to a lot of people in this room about the airport, whether via on the phone or personally. It is the gem of the county, and I think it's something that needs to be taken very seriously. I also want to point out the number of my colleagues from the Board of Legislators that are here, and I want to thank them for being present, because I know that we are here to listen and do our due diligence before we make any decision. And I know that we are all weighing out those options, because as elected officials, this is something that we take very seriously. And I want everyone to know here that this is not something that is rubber stamped, and we really want to take in information from everybody here. So again, I want to thank you for holding these meetings, and thank my colleagues, and thank everyone for coming here, and let everyone know that we are available. Call us, email us, come to meetings. That's our job, and that's what we're here for, is to listen to people, but also to protect the county and, of course, protect our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Nick Hartman, and he will be followed by Warren Gottlieb and Bill Wepner. Mr. Hartman.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Nick Hartman. I'm a county resident, a business owner, a pilot, and a member of the Westchester Flying Club. It's a group of 80 local pilots that's operated a shared fleet of small aircraft out of the airport since the 1960s. As a businessman, I've learned that if there's a deal on the table that others don't seem to be taking, then one of two things is probably happening. Either I'm a genius about to hit on something big, or I'm being foolish not seeing why others aren't proceeding. The airport privatization program isn't some new idea. It's been on the books for over 20 years. And in that time, the program hasn't exactly been a smashing success. There's a consistent history here. An exploratory proposal was announced. Local politicians glow with excitement about raiding the coffers of their local airport. We're going to fix up the parks. We're going to buy equipment for our schools. And then people start digging into the details. And at that point, there seems to be a collective, oh. As a result, there isn't a single airport in any state in our union currently using the program for their community's airport. At least 7 other airports, including Chicago Midway Airport, formally submitted applications to the program, only to withdraw them after fully exploring what the future might hold. Our neighbors across the river at Stewart Airport actually became the first airport to complete the program, but that ended up being a complete mess for area taxpayers. The state took $35 million for a 99-year lease from a globally qualified transportation operator. However, that private operator failed to achieve their objectives, and the company quickly decided they wanted to get out of the airport business. Then the illustrious Port Authority swooped in to bail out this deal, and just 7 years later, bought the lease back from the company for more than double what the company paid the state. According to one government report, despite transforming the airport into a bloated, loss-making enterprise, the company walked away with her Port Authority dollars and pocketed a $33 million profit paid for by us in this room. It's in part because of sham deals like this that your tolls on those Port Authority bridges are so darn high. The only airport currently using the program is in Puerto Rico, and with all due respect to our neighbors to the south, Puerto Rico is not exactly a beacon of government fiscal responsibility. Critical to the issue of airport governance is who's in charge. Despite prospective operators proclaiming how they're committed to being long-standing partners for our community, Puerto Rico teaches us some lessons here. In 2012, Highstar Capital joined up with a Mexican company to take control of the airport through a governance change. 2 years after that, Oaktree Capital bought out Highstar Capital's 50% interest as part of a broader acquisition. Oaktree is the company that originally proposed to do a deal with our airport. 3 years after that, Oaktree decided it no longer really felt like being in the airport business, and in turn sold its 50% share to a Canadian investment group. Something very similar is likely to happen if such a deal is crafted here in Westchester. Do we really want to be back here every few years for the next several decades, worried about which private company next wants to take a stab at governing airports? The companies involved here are all reputable investment firms simply looking out for the best interests of their shareholders. And that's a noble effort. And indeed, I'm sure some in this room likely have funds with such firms. However, we would be foolish not to realize that what's in the purely best financial interests of those investors is unlikely to be fully compatible with what's in the best interests of Westchester County. Even now, with the county as the primary governing body, residents and stakeholders are raising many areas, from noise to light GA to the increase in private charters, where governance issues are already challenging. And these things are not going to get better with a private company at the helm of our county's infrastructure. So here we are, looking at the possibility of a deal that others don't seem to be taking. What appeared first to be rosy no longer appears to be so. If we go forward with such a deal of governance change, will Westchester be seen as a genius or a gullible fool? That's ultimately a decision for the elected officials to take, but be warned, the voters are paying close attention and are not currently in a forgiving mood. So my advice to you is choose carefully. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hartman. Warren Gottlieb is the next speaker, and he will be followed by Bill Weaver. I'm sorry, I mispronounced the name before. Bill Weaver and John Ravitz.
Hello, my name is Warren Gottlieb. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be heard this evening. As a near 13-year resident of Newcastle, I am deeply concerned about governance. Past governance, present governance, and future governance at Westchester County Airport. This concern is not only based upon the irresponsible proposition that airport governance be handed over to private interests. It is also based upon the disturbing willingness of county government over recent years to voluntarily degrade its ability to ensure that the airport acts as a good neighbor to Newcastle and surrounding communities. More specifically, even with the existing governance structure, Westchester County Airport has been permitted to A, destroy the quality of life that for many residents served as the very basis for the purchase of their homes in Newcastle and the surrounding communities, and B, transform into an undeniable threat to property values, not to mention the environment and public safety. With each irresponsible new long-term lease that was executed at Westchester County Airport in recent years by the county with private operators, residents of Newcastle and surrounding communities have witnessed the tranquility and character of their homes and common spaces, along with the value of these characteristics, effectively confiscated and redistributed to private interests. In discussing the matter with fellow Newcastle and neighboring community residents, many have expressed surprise, outrage, and profound disappointment in elected county and federal officials at the utter lack of consideration of resident concerns with respect to airport governance, past, present, and future, particularly given the other challenges that are well known affecting property values in local hamlets since the 2008 economic downturn. Many are stunned at what strikes them as an undeniable industry-subordinate posture by the county to what all sides of the political spectrum agree is a severely harmful and unacceptable situation that will destroy Newcastle and its neighboring communities as we currently know them. In my mind, the county has two primary macro-level governance functions: promote the safety and welfare of residents and protect property values. With respect to Westchester County Airport, this has not been done. County and federal elected officials have not adequately been responding to the dangers posed, other than to tell us what little control they have left, instead of vigorously addressing the situation with the urgency and advocacy the situation deserves. Against this backdrop, the proposition that the county should now effectively surrender any meaningful semblance of governance authority at the airport represents nothing short of an unforgivable betrayal of the public trust. Finally, make no mistake, I do recognize the fact that an embrace of privatization at Westchester County Airport would likely alleviate a significant budgetary shortfall for Westchester County. However, I believe it would be horrendously bad public policy to address such shortfall by converting the airport into a profit center, thereby incentivizing expansion and a weakening of governance and accountability. Frankly, that would be tantamount to dumping Newcastle and neighboring communities from the frying pan into the fire. Instead, I support a transparent discussion to review all options for closing any budgetary shortfall other than those subordinate to legitimate resident interests to those of the aviation industry. Although I believe Westchester residents are already way overtaxed, a discussion for another day, I suppose, I believe the economic benefit of preserving the property values we have left and our quality of life would far outweigh a modest increase in the county tax burden, especially after many years of no increases in the county tax levy. Provided that county officials clearly explain the inherent trade-off and act with fiscal discipline reflective of a post-2008 environment, I strongly suspect I am not alone in this sentiment. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Bill Weaver, who is a former North Castle councilman and a former supervisor. And we're very happy to have him as next up to the microphone, followed by John Ravitz and Carolyn Cunningham. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Bill Weaver. I live in Armonk. I was the previous owner of Millionaire, which is one of the fixed base operators at the airport. I'm also a board member of the Westchester Aviation Association. I'm basically here speaking on my own tonight. I'm not speaking for any organization. The first gentleman who spoke stole the main word of the night. I've been involved in government I spent 18 years in government. I know there's a lot of things that government can do well, and there's a lot of things government can do poorly. But the first gentleman tonight who said, if it's not broken, don't fix it, is basically the word. Just as an idea, my family got involved at Westchester Airport in 1947. My family started a business in 1949, which I sold in 2015. I spent 48 years at the airport, and I could tell stories all night long of the good things and the bad things that have happened at this airport. And one of the main reasons there's been many issues is the transparency has never been good between the government and the public. Just a few informational things. I'm sorry, I don't have written notes, so I'll kind of jump around a little bit. The law that allows the county or for someone to look at becoming an owner or privatizing at the airport is a law that was passed, I think, during the Clinton administration. And if you look back, the law was passed basically for a way for airports that were in financial distress to be able to survive. That's why this law was created. And I don't think anyone in this room thinks that Westchester County Airport has a financial issue. So there's no reason that way it should be looked at. Number two, also, the final approval of this is not even the county's. If the county approves this, it has to be approved by the federal government. So the county was not even the final decision maker in this. If there is a company that comes in to take over the airport, they form a board. But no one has brought forward tonight that board is made up of airline people. So you're looking at a board that will help and decide how the airport should be run with all airline people. When you're looking at an airport that's 20% airline and 80% general aviation. That would be a horrible situation because that board is only going to be looking out for one thing, and that's the airlines. And that's the thing that we have control of, or you have control of right now, is the airlines. Don't give up the control that you have right now. people have said tonight, the airport is not a strain on the finances of the County of Westchester. The airport is its own separate fund. Every penny that it's made at the airport goes into fixing up that airport and improving the airport. I don't see any physical, or not physical, but I don't see a reason that the county would want to privatize this other than they want the money. There is no other reason but for you to try to say, well, we'll get this money and it will help us in the future. As you pointed out, it's a 40-year lease. The payments start out high and they end up going low. This is not going to be any savings to the people of Westchester County if they think they're saving money on taxes. No way, no how. It'll be another way for the county to get some money to spend on some other projects that they would like to do. Going forward, I would like to see the county continue to control the airport in the process that it does now. The people have someone to speak to if they want to. They don't have to speak to a private entity if there's a problem. They can go to their either local community or to the county. So I would hope you would do that going forward. I know my time's up. I could probably talk a lot more. I avail any county legislator, any person who would like to speak to me or information. I don't think you'll find anybody around who has more information at the airport than I do. So I willingly will come and talk to anybody. And I think the way going forward is for you to continue operations. And if we could have future transparency like this about the airport, I think there could be many improvements at the airport that would be good for the commercial person who wants to fly on an airline, the person who owns his own private airplane, or the community. There's buildings at the airport that were built in the 40s, before the county even took over the airport by the federal government. This airport was built to protect New York City for World War II, and the war ended, and the federal government gave the airport to the county. I'm sorry. I could speak at another time. Please keep control, but let's work together. The county, the people, the businesses at the airport. The airport can be improved, modernized, and not affect the community. Let's keep up the good communications. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I call up the next speaker, I just want to make sure everybody recognizes that this administration has been in office 5.5 months. We are conducting these open public hearings for this very purpose. So whatever criticisms and concerns you have, do keep in mind that we've begun this process of dialogue. If it didn't exist previously, that's not our quote-unquote fault. But I understand that when you're in a room full of people and there's emotion in the air, differentiate that we are now trying to understand opinions before any decisions are made. There is no active proposal that the Board of Legislators is considering, nor the administration. But we are here to listen and to really understand how you feel. And I think that's important because there's a tendency to, accuse in very general terms everybody, and not everybody was part of that decision process. Next speaker, John Ravitz, followed by Carolyn Cunningham, and then Susan Van Dolsen.
Thank you very much, County Executive Latimer. And my name is John Ravitz. I'm the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer for the Business Council of Westchester. We are the largest business membership organization in the county, representing about 1,000 businesses, ranging from the multi-international companies that call Westchester home to the hospitals and universities, the biotech firms, the professional service firms, the small, mid-sized businesses, 130 non-for-profits, and small solo entrepreneurs. And as I said last week, County Exec Latimer, I want to thank you on behalf of the business community. Transparency is important in government, and it sure as heck is important in business. And what these hearings have done today, hopefully, last week, tonight, and in the weeks to come, have hopefully lowered the rhetoric and started talking about what can be done in a responsible manner. Now, the Business Council of Westchester has always supported PP3s, public-private partnerships. And as we talk about the airport, we don't want to talk about expansion, but enhancement. We want to talk about how the community can have a voice working with the 9th floor and the 8th floor of county legislature to bring in a private entity that has a proven track record in running municipal airports and can deal with many of the quality of life issues that have come up last week and are going to come up tonight and are going to come up in the weeks ahead. We should not be afraid of taking a leadership role in bringing in and exploring these options. Why? Because we've seen that they have worked in other parts of this country. And if they've worked in other parts of this country, we should use our creativity, use our expertise to make sure that it can work here in Westchester County. But this also gives us a great opportunity, County Executive Latimer, under your leadership, that when we talk about governance, and we talk about the governance under a possible PP3 relationship, what we should ask for from that private entity. We should ask and expect nothing less than creating working communities, working committees to deal with management and aviation and environmental protection issues. We can help reduce the airport's environmental footprint and strengthen environmental protections by bringing in the experts from the community on environmental issues to work hand in hand with a private organization. We can deal with issues of EPA spills prevention. We can deal with issues of storage and transfer of aviation fuel products. We can deal with the issue of the wastewater treatment capacity. These are all important quality of life issues that actually bringing in people who have done this in other parts of the country can actually improve the quality of life in our community. Again, we're not talking about enlarging the airport, we're talking about enhancement of services for the community and for the county. Now, as I said earlier, we should also look at how bringing in a new private corporation could also help us in terms of dealing with hiring and buying locally, which will also help related businesses throughout the community as well, and also to continue to strengthen the workforce development piece of what the aviation community can give. It's not just the pilots, it's not just the stewardesses, there are other professions that can be learned at the airport and trained at the airport, in which we can give people an opportunity for success in working in those industries. In closing, I'll close as we did last week. The Business Council of Westchester is proud of the fact that in the airport in 2 different locations, our Business Hall of Fame plaques are there. And they're there because we want businesses from all over the country and all over the world to see the type of businesses that we have in Westchester County. The type of businesses that have made a commitment to our county to not only create jobs, but create resources for the community. So when you look at those plaques and you see all the winners from the small business and the family-owned business and the entrepreneurial success and the women in business and the corporate citizenship, those are all things we should be proud of. Those are all things that we should use the airport as a resource for to continue to promote economic development. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Carolyn Cunningham, and she will be followed by Susan Van Dolsen and Barry Malvin.
Thank you, County Executive George Latimer, and I thank you all for listening. This is a very important hearing, and I have been to many over the years, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of Federated Conservationists of Westchester County, and they are a 50-year-old organization because a lot of us are concerned environmentalists in Westchester, and one of our most long-standing issues has been the county airport. And this is because you know as well as I that nobody likes to live near a big airport. And we have worked for 40 years that I have been a member to keeping Westchester County Airport small, as it should be next to a reservoir. There's, we can't undo the location, but I have a feeling nowadays that an airport would never allow to be located next to one of our biggest reservoirs of drinking water. And I say that because Westchester County, but tonight's topic of governance is all important because of the fact that you own the airport and the Board of Legislators has the control of the airport. We have been able to keep this airport small. For 40 years, we have worked diligently at pointing out any pollution problems and working on the TUR, the Terminal Use Agreement, which controls only the passenger and the commercial part of the airport. But we have you as legislators who are responsible for the control and the governance of the airport. Don't change it. That has worked. It has worked for the past 40 years that I have been involved, and it will work for the next 40 years because you are responsible and listening to your constituents. And they don't want a big airport, and nor should the environment take the big airport. So you have to keep it small. And you have done that amazingly well over the last 40 years, and I think you can continue to do it. You don't need to change anything because the Board of Legislators should have control on the county airport. And I know the aviation's interests push for expansion, but you should resist it because the environment and our living quality of life is more important. I thank you.
Our next speaker is Susan Van Dolsen, and she will be followed by Barry Malvin and Carol McMillan.
Good evening. Thank you so much, County Executive Latimer, for hosting these public sessions. I've lived in Westchester for almost my entire 60 years of life. I grew up in White Plains and lived in Portchester, Rye, and now in Harrison. The reason most of us live in Westchester is because of the proximity to New York City and the great quality of life. We pay high taxes, but we understand the public benefit of county parks and properties owned by the county. It's very important to me and my family that as taxpayers and residents, we can trust our elected officials to represent our interests when dealing with the operations and governance of county assets. The county airport is currently managed by Avports, as you mentioned, a private company, but the county retains oversight and control. If the airport's leased to a private company, it will be impossible for Westchester residents to feel assured that our voices will continue to be heard. I'm not an attorney, nor am I an accountant, but I know that when a private company seeks to lease an airport, the motivation is to make a profit. The former county executive proposed 2 deals in order to get a short-term infusion of cash, as you described, to fill a budget hole. The current administration faces a shortfall due to this poor fiscal management from the former administration. We wouldn't even be discussing a change in governance if the county wasn't cash-strapped and looking for a way to use funds dedicated to the airport's operation for other purposes. If the airport's leased and the county no longer pays the operator a fixed fee, there's an incentive to make changes to increase profit. It's likely operations will expand. The increased air traffic and pollution will impact residential areas near the airport, and those areas will suffer decreased property values. The long-term negative financial impacts on the county could far outweigh any short-term cash influx. The county wisely passed a law codifying the terminal use regulations about 15 years ago. Can the county assure us that no change in the TUR will be made if the airport's leased to a private company? Can the county assure us that a private company will not allow corporate interests to continue to expand their presence at the airport? Can the county assure us that our legislators will retain the right to reject lease amendments that may provide more favorable terms to corporate interests at the airport? The public hasn't seen the Macquarie lease agreement, the bid chosen through the RFP process, but we do know that environmental protections were only a tiny fraction of the final score when the county went through that selection process. We also know the pollution insurance of $5 million per incident and $10 million total is nowhere near enough to cover potential costs to mitigate water pollution should it occur in the reservoir or nearby wells. The estimated cost to build the filtration plant is $10 billion, and the operating cost is estimated to be $100 million per year per the New York State DEP. County legislators and others have raised concerns about the environmental liability that the county would retain with a change in governance. In a meeting I attended, one of the legislators stated there are holes in the environmental review, missing paperwork, and that a level 2 analysis must be done. No deal to change the current governance should be considered without a comprehensive environmental review. The FAA program that would enable Westchester to lease the airport has only been undertaken by 2 airports, Stewart and Puerto Rico, as a former speaker explained. Then Stewart was subsequently sold to the Port Authority. I watched a video of a meeting that was held this February by the Board of Legislators Committee of the Whole. And they met with the WICS group, which is a group of attorneys that were hired to advise the county about the FAA privatization program. There were pros and cons discussed, and I think the negatives far outweigh the positives. For example, there were risk factors such as noise and environmental issues, uncontrolled growth concerns, property tax considerations, regulatory risk, and the fact that fixed-based operators are a different user set. WICS even said that at this time, currently, mentioned that the FAA is holding a spot for us, for Westchester County's airport. I would really like to see the FAA notified immediately that we don't want that spot, that this is not something this county wants. As so many prior to me and probably after me will say, this deal, any deal to privatize the airport, any hybrid deal that was mentioned in meetings, or anything that would change governance is only going to hurt us as a county. We don't see an upside to it, and I think you should tell the FAA as soon as possible that you withdraw your the county's option. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Barry Malvin, and he will be followed by Carol McMillan and Neil Powell.
Thank you for coming up to North Castle, Mr. County Executive and the County Board. I'd like to point out 2 things. The first is that I would love the board and the County Board to research what has worked most successfully in other parts of the country and report back to us and give us the benefit of making informed decisions. That was the first question I had when I heard people talking about the choice. The second thing I want to mention is that as a practical matter, you're dealing with profit versus nonprofit. A private company is, as has been said, interested ultimately in serving its owners, shareholders, and to make a profit. The county board and the county legislators are here to serve the people, to serve all of the people in Westchester. And that focus is so extremely different than the focus of a private corporation that, as demonstrated, you're here talking to the citizens to get their input. It's important. County serves its citizens. The third point I want to make as a rational question is that how do you plausibly construct a 40-year lease with a private company that can envision all of the changes that are going to happen and the changes that are required over the next 40 years. I think of driverless cars. I think of drone transportation, drone delivery. And these are what they're talking about now. Nobody knows. Nobody has the vision to anticipate what's coming, no less construct a contract that enables and gives you the control that you will need to serve not only North Castle, but if you, one of the issues expand, stay the same, you can look at not only the financial, but who is the County of Westchester serving? When I get on 684 in the evening or in the morning, there's a lot of traffic going to the north end of the county and up through the county, past the county, up to Putnam, etc. We as a county, as a community, have to decide who we're serving and what is in the best interest of our county, and to serve our own neighbors and to be good neighbors. I can't see a private company thinking that broadly. So I really don't see how you can enter into a reasonably flexible lease as a practical matter. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carol McMillan, and she will be followed by Neil Powell and Julie Lombardo. Excuse me, Julie Lombardo. The speaker is Carol McMillan.
Yes, thank you, County Executive Latimer, for calling these meetings. I have to say, a little closer. I'm tall. That's him. There we go. Is that better? Okay. I'm thankful every day that I get up and appreciate the climate of change that you have introduced to the county. My name is Carol McMillan. I've lived here since 1988, in Rybrook since 1991. My reason for moving to New York was to join the national staff of Girl Scouts of the USA. And choosing Westchester was very simple for me because the offices were in Midtown Manhattan, and the National Training Center, where I'd be spending a good bit of time, is in Briarcliff Manor. My responsibilities also involved a great deal of travel, so I was handy to both the Westchester Airport as well as LaGuardia. And I do remember the Quonset huts as well. In the fall of 2016, I was very surprised to see Robert Astorino's proposal to cede management of the airport to a private company, especially as I'd also learned that a master planning process was supposedly underway but not completed. I immediately contacted my legislator at that time, David Gelfarb, and I was pleased to see subsequently that the board wisely decided not to act on the initial proposal, but to delay and seek further information. The current board's further delay has brought us to this point. Although I'm very skeptical of privatization for short-term financial gain, I do believe that there are many ways in which government and private enterprise can collaborate for mutual benefit. Going back to my work with the Girl Scouts, let me talk a little bit about the Edith Macy Conference Center. It's been a center for adult training since 1926, when the gift was made in Edith's honor by her husband, V. Everett Macy. Maybe some of you have visited it. I see some shaking heads. However, by the 1970s, the idea of doing professional staff training in tents was no longer very popular. So the organization invested in a state-of-the-art conference and training facility. And as I say, it has been used since that time, both for nonprofits as well as other nonprofits, as well as the Girl Scouts and business meetings as well. For the first few years of its existence, the Girl Scouts ran the entire facility, the hotel and dining services as well as conference services. And there came a time that they realized that actually hotel management wasn't a core competency, and that it would be better to hire an outside management company with an expertise in conference management. The Girl Scouts retained full management of the facility and all investment in facility decisions. From what I understand, this is pretty analogous to the role of Avports with regard to the Westchester Airport and to the county. I spent several years as the director of training for the Girl Scouts, and I can say during that time that the relationship with the management company was good and always focused on how to maximize the benefit of the asset while maintaining quality services to all guests. Looking at the operations of the airport, it seems very unlikely to me that a for-profit company standing to make money from increases in net revenue would be motivated to compromise for the good of the community. I agree, free money is hard to pass up, but I was raised to understand that things that seem too good to be true usually are. There are only a few ways in which the Westchester Airport can generate enough revenue to spin off millions of dollars to the county and remunerate a management company. Increasing revenue can only come from two sources: increased volume, which of course brings greatly increased risks, or increased prices. Now, I recently took a flight from Newark Airport. I was quite surprised to find that my sandwich, piece of fruit, and bottle of water breakfast cost $18. So I thought that's, maybe a captive market is a good thing, but it's also just another form of tax on the people that are using the airport. On the other hand, it's also tempting to think, well, maybe increased revenue could come from cost reduction. There's a category called waste, fraud, and abuse, but it always seems rarely that we can find enough there. The other cost-cutting measures can have serious repercussions in the environmental and safety areas. So I urge the county to renew its approach to managing the airport with a company that possesses the expertise appropriately in airport management, but without expanding that partnership to ceding control of fiscal and other issues. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Neil Powell, and he will be followed by Julie Lombardo and Earl Yaffa.
Thank you very much. I want to thank County Executive Latimer for the amount of transparency we're seeing tonight is very refreshing. Rather than make a statement, I can't compete with the people who've spoken so eloquently before me, and putting aside the Alice in Wonderland scenarios we heard from a couple of other speakers who are very much in favor of expanding the airport. I want to ask, and I don't expect an answer tonight, how we can become comfortable knowing the tension that exists between the airport and the vision of it being operated by somebody else other than the county. How can we be comfortable that this will not turn into an ATM machine in the future? We feel very comfortable about you. My wife, Joanna Powell, worked very hard along with her colleagues with Indivisible in getting you elected to this position. But you're probably not going to be here forever.
I'm pretty sure of that.
And there's something about money which is, it's very interesting. If there's a budget gap that needs to be filled, if there are other reasons to come and tap the airport for a little bit more money, I'm sure that somebody who's running the airport on a for-profit basis will think of some very creative ways to get you what you're looking for. So how can we be made comfortable that the elected officials who come after you, who in the scenario that the governance is now being moved to a private entity, who are not going to be facing the electorate in the future, as you would, how can we become comfortable that that ATM machine will not be rung over and over and over again? I thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Julie Lombardo, and she will be followed by Earl Yaffa and Deborah Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Thank you, Mr. Latimer, for arranging this community input meeting.
Would you kind of just speak right into the mic if you would, or hold the mic in your hand if you'd like.
My name is Julie Lombardo, and I'm a 14-year resident of Pleasantville. Two words that come to mind when I think of governance of the airport are accountability and transparency. If governance of the airport is turned over to a private company who has a financial stake in profiting from the airport's operation, expansion would be inevitable. What for-profit business do you know of that doesn't try to make a profit? And how do they make that profit? By increasing revenues and cutting expenses. An increase in revenues at the airport would likely come from additional flights and airport development. There are already too many planes overhead. Development may come in the way of additional airport hangars and maintenance facilities. Again, there are already too many flights. Signing additional FBO leases may bring in more revenue, but also more flights, none of which are subject to the terminal use regulations, meaning planes every 90 seconds to 2 minutes will be the norm. It actually already is starting to feel like the norm in my neighborhood on many days of the week. Cutting of expenses will likely mean less environmental protection. We don't yet know the effects of all of this air traffic on the water supply. We cannot risk more planes adding to the pollution, nor do we yet know the cumulative effect of the noise pollution on our residents' health and well-being. Again, we cannot risk more planes adding to the pollution. It would be irresponsible to do so. Giving up public authority is what is at stake here. When it comes to governance of the airport, I believe we need to maintain a public authority and create a private-public partnership where neither party benefits from increasing profits at the airport. This is the best way I can see to ensure accountability and transparency to the citizens of Westchester County. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Earl Yaffa, and he will be followed by Deborah Porter and Harvey Braunstein.
Earl Yaffa is not here, but Ed Wood, you're just speaking for Earl Yaffa, and he just had some very quick statements to make.
And I hate to say this,
really?
but we said there was no replacement
I didn't
speaking, if you don't
okay.
mind.
No, I don't mind
I
at all.
apologize.
Yeah.
We're happy to recognize you individually, but I understand. I'm sorry, but we set that as a rule up front. I have to be consistent with it. All right, so if Mr. Yaffa is not here, then we'll go to Deborah Porter, and she will be followed by Harvey Braunstein, and followed by Ed Frank.
Good evening. I am Deborah Porter, and I am an attorney, and I spent much of my career working as a law secretary for judges in the Supreme Court in Manhattan. And in the last 9 years of that type of work, I worked in the commercial division of the Supreme Court, and our cases were exclusively commercial agreements involving leases and managing agents and other relevant topics. And I would like to address it at the risk of being a little bit pedantic as an attorney, because I'm very familiar with the difference between a lease and a managing agent and what that implies in terms of the county's ability to control what happens at the airport. So I'm going to start with the difference between a managing agent and a lessee, because the deal that Astorino proposed was a commercial lease with an operator, which would be a tenant of the county. And a lease is a contract. That's all it is. It's a contract. And the only control you have once you have a contractual agreement is what's spelled out in the contract. No citizen can come into the county and say, listen, I don't like this contract. I want the lessee to do something different because it's not good for me as a resident. The county's answer has got to be, well, we're bound by that contract. And the contract that was being proposed was a 40-year lease. And the average commercial lease in Manhattan is 10 years. So it's 4 times as long. It's 2 generations of citizens. That's not a commercially reasonable amount of time. So that's a very serious loss of control. When you have a managing agent, you have a very different situation. The managing agent is like a trustee. It has a fiduciary duty. It must behave honorably towards its contracting party, which in this case would be the county. And it cannot act for its own benefit and not in the interest of the county. Yes, it can get a fee that's spelled out in the contract, but there's a huge difference between its incentives and the amount of control that the county would have. If the lessee breaches the contract, yeah, the county can sue for breach of contract, but no citizen can do that. And as somebody pointed out, you may not be here in 40 years to sue the lessee.
Listen, let's put that one to bed. I'm 64. I don't think I'm going to make it to 104. We're clear on that.
Okay. And, you know, lawsuits take a really long time. They take 6 to 8 years to wind up. So, you know, you got to look at it all that way. And I want to talk about one other thing, which is the pollution risk. First of all, most insurance policies exclude pollution coverage. And the ones that do have it, it is very, very expensive, which is why the Oak Tree deal had such a minimal amount of pollution insurance that was laughable compared to the cost of cleaning up the reservoir should the unthinkable happen. And everybody knows that when you enter into a contract, everybody shakes hands and they're happy about all the money they're getting, and the problems are the things that arise down the road. And you have to be able to foresee them when you write the contract, and it's not that easy to foresee what's going to happen in 40 years to an airport right next to the reservoir. And you have to look, I think, as a government to the federal statutes that have been passed to protect the environment from spills. For example, the federal government has a law, and so does New York State, by the way, the Navigation Act of New York State, and the federal government has a couple of other statutes that protect the environment from oil spills. And what do they say as a government? Strict liability to any landowner. They must clean it up, whether they're at fault or not, because the federal government considers our water and land to be so important and needing protection from an oil spill that they're not going to risk relying on insurance or a contract. Doesn't matter who spilled the oil, you own the land, you have to clean it up. If your oil tank under the ground at your house leaks, you have to clean it up, even if it was left there by the prior owner. So that's how important the federal government thinks taking care of the environment is. I expect no less from the county. And then the final thing I want to bring out, I have to stop?
Yes, afraid so.
I'm sorry.
You're welcome to add anything else, Deborah, in writing. We know we have another session coming up in a couple of weeks. Feel free to attend and addend.
I just want to say one more thing really quick about limited liability. If you get a contract...
Deborah, please, I don't want to be a bad guy. We have to limit it to 5. For most people, if you go to local community meetings, usually limit you to 3, so we want it to go a little longer. Can I ask staff to turn the lights on in the rest of the room? Now that it's getting close to nighttime outside, it might be romantic, but it's not necessarily good visibility. Again, we're not trying to cut anybody off. We just have to be understanding, and we're happy to... Anyway, in the meantime, we'll keep moving. The next speaker is Harvey Braunstein, and he will be followed by Ed Frank. And we have Louis Torreri scheduled, but it looks like he may not be here, but we'll call his name again when his time comes. Harvey.
Mr. County Executive, thank you for a magnificent lesson in civics and an excellent model of what it means to govern well. I cannot top Mr. Hartman, but I can share a story. Tarzan, Lord Greystone, is caught in Africa and returned to his estates in England. He's brought to the veranda by his uncle, Sir Ralph Richardson, and he Richardson sweeps the land incredibly large, and he says, Johnny, he says, never sell the land. Never sell a 40-year lease for an upfront payment of illusory value. Never sell the birthright of Westchester County for a bowl of warm lentils. For the record, the net present value of $1 million to be paid in 40 years is probably about $50,000, which is the equivalent of 4 Happy Meals for a family at McDonald's. Understand and never part with the infrastructure. It is a part of the muscles and sinews of the body of this county. Another story. 50 years ago, I was asked by Yale University to calculate the number of desks and rooms and laboratories and find out what its costs were. They were selling this stuff for nothing to the Department of Defense, and they were costing themselves a fortune, and they realized they were screwing themselves. Calculate carefully, understand the true present and future cost of running HPN. Calculate carefully and set your fee structure accordingly. If part of the cost is paying for the ecological purity of the New York State reservoir system, then a supplemental fee structure may be required, and there may be funding on the federal or state level for that. I have no problem with an apport management type of a thing, but they've got to be good, and it's got to be limited. And I don't know who those people are anymore. If the theme of this evening is government, let us remember we cannot govern those rights and properties we have surrendered. In summary, Westchester County must and can retain the ability to control its own aeronautical destiny. This really is a jewel box of an airport. There will become a time in the future when we will not be landing planes with carbon-based fuels. We need to preserve and protect what it is that we have and what it is that we own, and understand that the future is going to be very technologically different from the present, and the opportunities abound. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Ed Frank. He would be followed by Mr. Turieri, who I believe is left. Therefore, the next speaker after that will be John Mann.
Thank you, County Executive Latimer, for coming again. The privatization of the airport would reduce public control over the airport and create more havoc than what now exists. Jet engine exhaust from excessive low-altitude aircraft is being disseminated over a concentrated area, resulting in environmental hazards. Let me read to you, as a resident of the town of Newcastle, one of the codes in the town of Newcastle, which was adopted in 1989, and it defines unreasonably intrusive sound as any sound which either annoys, disturbs, injures, or endangers the comfort, repose, health, peace, or safety of a reasonable person of normal sensitivities under the circumstances. And of course, there are days, times, and sound levels that are recorded in the code. Unfortunately, sounds created by aircraft are exempted from the limitations of the code. I've lived in the town of Newcastle for over 30 years. I can tell you something has drastically changed over the past year at an increasing rate. In addition to the number of flights that have occurred, likely by those that are able to lobby for their own point of view, this has resulted, as you mentioned the last time, you're getting an abundance of complaints from the town of Newcastle. Something has drastically changed. The privatization of the airport would not only create more havoc than what now exists and what now needs to be corrected, Westchester County must retain control over the airport, strict control. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Torrieri is not with us, so the next speaker will be John Mann, and he will be followed by Joshua, so I can't see the last name, Joshua with an S? Shapiro. Okay, thank you, and then Ellen Weiniger.
Good evening. I'm John Mann. I'm a resident of the town here, and I've served as chair of the Global Warming Task Force in the past under Supervisor Berman and Weaver, and I'm really delighted to be part of this forum. Good government with using good governance really can represent the people well, and it's great to have this opportunity to speak about some of the issues. I'm definitely opposed to privatizing. I think a public-private partnership that we should be thinking about are the private entities that are already at the airport. How many corporate hangars are there at the airport? Does anyone know?
Well, there are five fixed-based operators, if that's what you're referring to.
There are 18 corporate hangars. Okay, so they're getting a huge advantage of public spending by using the airport. If the airport needs to be updated, those corporations, aside from giving some donations to nonprofits around the county, should be part of the solution. They're people who, they're employees who live in the county, use the airport. They're visiting workers and executives from other parts of the country and other parts of the world come in and out of the airport. If the improvements, for security and upgrades need to be done, they can certainly be part of the solution, also as part of their corporate social responsibility. And that's really all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Joshua Shapiro, and he will be followed by Ellen Weiniger and Tracy Levy.
Good evening. One of the great things about speaking 30 people after the start is that most good points have already been made, so I don't have to go over them myself. So thank you for all the previous speakers. I think, as someone mentioned, we should look to other experience, and the place that has had the most experience with privatization is Great Britain, and it's been an unmitigated disaster. They've nationalized their train system, they've nationalized their water system, their power system, the airport in Heathrow, all have been privatized, and it's been literally a train wreck. They've had so many train accidents from the operators who've been running what was National Rail that they've had to really take over the responsibilities publicly. In the United States, Pittsburgh and Chicago have privatized their parking systems, and they've seen rates that their parking garages have tripled or even quintupled. I think that even if that experience were positive, there is a big problem in negotiating with with an operator, which is one of asymmetry, that you've done this once and they've done this many times, and they have the experience that you don't have. They have the lawyers that you don't have, and that makes it very difficult, even if you are omniscient, to be able to negotiate well. And as someone very well pointed out, none of us here can see what's going to happen in 40 years. So to be succinct, I think that there is a temptation to get a lump sum and to use that for an immediate budget repair. And the way a way of dealing with that is to say, if there is a large payment up front, it should go to the county in some sort of reserve fund rather than to be paid out in an immediate use. And that would keep people from being so eager to take it. I think the second thing that has mostly been ignored in the conversation is general aviation or private aviation, and that the number of flights that we're talking about is 10 times as much as the number of scheduled flights. So focusing on private aviation is important. And one way of immediately dealing with that would be higher landing fees, so that the market system, the private market, by raising landing fees to where it's no longer advantageous for it, should create an equilibrium so that we don't have to legislate number of flights per day. And the last thing that I think might be addressed is to focus on the law that creates the airport structure the way it is. Because the issue, as I understood it, was that we want to be able to take money out of the airport, and right now the county is not able to recoup extra revenues. So money invested in understanding that and litigating if necessary would be a way that would be a heck of a lot easier than going through the pain of a long-term contract. And in conclusion, I'd like to say that we want to privilege voters, not shareholders. And and if we decide in haste, we repent at leisure. And finally, that the taxes that we pay, excuse me, what we avoid in taxes now, we're paying in private fees later. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me just clarify again for any of the speakers. We do not have a proposal on the table to do these things. We are listening open-endedly to commentary on it. The prior administration advanced a proposal which was rejected by the Board of Legislators. So just be sure as you comment, you're not coming up to us to say, and you're planning to do this and don't, because we're not planning to do it right now. We're listening to what people ought to do. I know this is strange. This is like public comment before we do something. If we do it and we may not do it, we may not want to do it. But this is a different means of governance. And the first slide was transparency. So just, until I do something really stupid, give me the benefit of the doubt as a new county executive. Okay, Ellen Weiniger, followed by Tracy Levy, and then Bob Levy.
Good evening. Thank you, County Executive Latimer and Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins and other officials. Thank you for the opportunity to address this public hearing. My name is Ellen Weininger. I'm Director of Educational Outreach for Grassroots Environmental Education, a science-based environmental health nonprofit serving communities, local and state governments, and other organizations nationwide. We are deeply concerned about any consideration of any change in governance over the county airport, which would alter control over operations, transparency, and accountability. This is especially concerning in light of the critical issues that must be regularly overseen and addressed to protect our health, our children, our communities, our fragile drinking water supply, our air quality, noise levels, our property values, and quality of life. For many years, the Westchester County Airport has operated and thrived as a public-private partnership where neither the county nor the operator derive benefit from increasing profits at the airport. A change in governance would shake that balance and would ensure expansion. The county must be able to tightly restrict airport development in order to prevent losing further control over operations at the airport. There should be some distinction maintained between the county's financial considerations and its policy objectives so that wise policies are not compromised by short-term financial goals. Financial considerations must factor and weigh all costs: environmental contamination, health costs, community costs, loss of property values, and loss of tax base. A change in governance, for example, would likely restrict the county's ability to adjust environmental targets. New scientific studies continue to emerge demonstrating the need for more stringent regulations for pollution levels and action measures. We cannot predict what those new pollutant triggers may be or potential new pollutants of concern. Full transparency is imperative while the county must maintain the ability to take precautionary measures as needed. Furthermore, the public must also maintain the ability to work with county government regarding the airport and its operations, including maintaining the public's ability and the right to inspect records and reports, as well as the right to request and obtain unpublished documents through the FOIL process. Just last summer, PFOAs and PFOs, toxic compounds, were found to be leaching under the airport into neighboring private wells, highlighting the vulnerability of our water supply, the Kensico Reservoir, which is adjacent to the airport and serves as the drinking water supply for more than 9 million people here in Westchester and New York City. These compounds, as I've mentioned in my previous testimony, are linked to endocrine disruption, thyroid disease, developmental and reproductive problems, as well as cancer. They are known to bioaccumulate and not break down in the environment. This is an important turning point for the county as it seeks to address this issue while examining governance. What would happen with a different airport governing structure? How would our fragile water supply be monitored? Who would be responsible, accountable? How would the public be informed? In the absence of regulatory framework, what levels of concern will be considered? How would that change to best reflect emerging science? The process and the outcome will depend largely on who is in charge. Recently, the EPA suppressed a report that was attempted to be released by the Agency for Toxic Substances and Disease Registry that suggested a much more harmful level of exposure of PFOAs and PFOs by 10 times. The EPA level, advisory level, is at 70 parts per trillion. The Agency for Toxic Substances is as low as 12 parts per trillion. Independent science says it should be at 1 part per trillion. Most people would want to know if their drinking water contains substances that can make them sick. Furthermore, people have a right to know the risks and what they must do to protect themselves. People have a right to expect their government to put public health ahead of all else. But what will private interests do? In closing, how much do we need to know about what we put into our environment, our air, our water, our soil? It is more important today than ever before. Our county government must remain accountable to us. We have a right to know, a right to advocate for the best policies, unimpeded by private interests, which will prevent all of that from taking place in our county. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. We still have another 7 to 10 speakers left. Tracy Levy is the next speaker, followed by Bob Levy, and then followed by Dr. Susan Rubin.
Hi. Will you be sharing the slides that you showed earlier? Are they available? Will they be available on the website?
Catherine? Is Catherine with us? Will they be on our website?
On the Westchester Gov website?
I assume they will. Tracy, call tomorrow and we'll let you know the specifics. Catherine Chaffee will be in charge of how we post it, where we post it.
Okay.
But they'll be available so you can have
I'd
them.
love to see them. The airport absolutely needs to remain fully accountable to the public. Any change that turns the airport into a profit center, whether that profit center is to the benefit of the county or to the benefit of a private corporation, It will almost certainly lead to expansion and reduce accountability. The county must maintain control and, quite frankly, do a better job of scrutinizing future requests for lease amendments with hidden plans for expansion. I'd like to add that the master plan was based on a study that was conducted by DY Consultants, and I ask you to please reconsider submitting that plan, even with the caveat that forthcoming amendments are planned. The DY Consultant study was not an independent study. They were allowed to bid on the contract. It also has many holes in it and did not complete an environmental study. So, I'm sorry. That's all I have prepared for now. Bob Levy was here with my 10-year-old son, and he had to take him home, so he won't be speaking.
Right. We'll put the graphic up again. It is up already. Anyone who wants to submit written testimony in excess of what they were able to share, or anyone who left early, airport2018@westchestergov.com, and we'll accept any written testimony. And for those who gave spoken testimony that have it in an email format, please email it to us. It'll be part of the public record. Our next speaker is Dr. Susan Rubin, and she will be followed by Jordana Silverstein and Robert Fleischer.
Hi there. So I used to be a dentist in this town for many years. I'm no longer drilling and filling and billing in Armonk. Instead, I'm a food and environmental educator. I work with kids and I grow food, teach them how to grow food, and I teach everyone how to live a little lighter on the earth. I also trained with, Al Gore and the Climate Reality Project many years ago, and here's a fun fact about general aviation. A private single jet burns more greenhouse gases than an average American does in 1 year. Clean air, safe water are essential to life, and this is what I do in my life now, as I do everything I can to protect air and water. Our air quality in Westchester County is not pristine. From what I've been reading, we've gone from a D to an F with air quality, and these frequent flights, and they are frequent, are definitely impacting. The nearby watershed must be protected. To destroy it will be a catastrophe that cannot be undone. And let me tell you, as a dentist, I've seen disasters that can't be undone. And water, we just don't want to do that. And I guess I'm still a dentist because I still believe in prevention. I think it's probably the most important thing we can do. I also, as a dentist, I know that frequency really matters. You could sit down and eat a whole bag of Milky Way bars and not get a cavity, versus if you had one Milky Way bar every single afternoon, you're gonna bomb out your teeth. So frequency matters. And the planes are flying over my house right now at a 3-minute frequency. It's really getting out of control. Which reminds me, I brought you a gift, Mr. Latimer.
I don't know if I can accept it, but let's see what it is.
Well, let's hopefully, in all.
Oh, yes, Susan, you mentioned this to me on Facebook.
Yes, so this is.
Get rid of these things.
Exactly. So frequency, that paper cup, number one, it's not recyclable.
Susan, I'm with you. This was handed to me.
Yeah.
I'll use that for the future.
Yeah,
You're absolutely right.
I'm giving you 2.
I get it.
So, but anyway, once again, I just want to make the point of frequency. The plastic lining that hot cup, every day you're drinking plastic.
Copper, you got me in trouble here with this cup of coffee. Thank you very much. It's very kind. Appreciate it.
And I have one last thing to say for those business people in the crowd, and that is, if you think the economy is more important than the environment, then try holding your breath while counting your money. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Jordana Silverstein, and she will be followed by Robert Fleischer and Myra Saul.
First, I'd like to thank you, Mr. Latimer, for what you've brought to the table in the few short months you've been in office. You have given us a lot to be thankful about, and we really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you.
I'd like to say and you are a class act, so I just wanted to
Thank you.
throw that in there.
I'll be even better when I start using the right cup for my coffee.
In the 2 hours and 10 minutes that the mic has been open, no less than 25 planes have flown over my house, have made my windows shake, have forced us to put white noise in our home. That's on a good day. That's only if the planes are flying at 5.58 minutes apart. So, Ms. Becker, if you're telling us not to worry about the future is already here because we had 258 flights on Memorial Day. On a good day, it's several planes fewer. But no.
Ms. Silverstein, what community do you live in?
I live in Mount Pleasant, and I am a couple of small points. One, we talked about transparency and governance. I trust you wholeheartedly. I don't necessarily know if I trust my representatives who have told me that the noise that we're hearing is really not there and that it's just a few people who have access to go out and to complain. And when I spoke to Ms. Cunzio, you said it was only a few people. I don't know. Do you think just a few people will be upset about 258 planes, or will be the entire community who's underneath runway 16, and that's without expansion? So please do not tell me it's just a few people who are complaining about it. Yes, you did say that. I also asked you up front when you were running for office, are you approving the expansion of the airport? Are you in favor?
Ms. Silverstein, why don't we address the general issue of
the
governance?
general issues. Here are the general issues.
Okay.
I am concerned about what a lease would look like. Would it have any assignability clauses in there? And if so, under what circumstances? What happens when deep pockets suddenly have holes in them? What is the insurance going to look like? Is it going to be able to cover a fuel dump somewhere in our environment? It's going to happen. With the frequency of the planes, I can assure you we're going to have an environmental disaster. I'm a dog trainer now, but I used to be an environmental lawyer in New Jersey and worked on many Superfund sites and surplus sites. It will happen, and we have to have money to care for that. So whatever going forward, we need to look into assignability, we need to look into indemnification, and we need to make sure we have the right environmental coverage, not the bare minimum, because any cleanup is not going to be a bare minimum. This is our water. If we have water in our reservoir, what are we to do? So I'm all kinds of fired up now, and this is an issue that has become like a full-time job to me, because I want to have a safe Westchester, and I do not want us to cede control of our airport and make it a for-profit center. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Robert Fleischer. He will be followed by Myra Saul and Jonathan Wang.
Hi, I'm Ms. Robert Fleischer. I'm from Newcastle. I want to make clear that I'm speaking on behalf of myself and not as a representative of the Aircraft Advisory Board at the county airport. Try to condense for things that have already been said. I understand that the airport adds utility to many residents and corporate interests located within our county. For anyone currently enjoying these benefits, it is just as true that much of the cost of those benefits is absorbed by a very distinct and not overlapping subset of residents and businesses in our county. This creates a very inequitable situation. All residents of the county should be able to rely upon county and federal officials to balance these inequities and protect private property interests when things get too far out of balance, which I would submit is the situation we find ourselves in today. Without dwelling on how we got to this point, because we're here, the idea of taking incremental steps that would further weaken the ability of our county and federal officials to proactively use all of their abilities and all of their creativity to address shortcomings would be a tragic mistake. Previous decisions from years past have already made this a difficult task enough. Any discussion of a governance structure that would provide any monetary incentive for the county to make decisions that would otherwise not be made should be recognized as an absolute danger to the residents of this county. If we don't think that this hasn't already happened, all you have to do is ask yourself what the airport would look like today if extracting cash from the airport's balance sheet was not even a remote possibility, or if the negative externalities of expansion in recent years had been priced into any potential benefits that any resident or corporate interest enjoys today. We need our public elected county and federal officials who are directly accountable to the residents of our county to focus on fixing the challenges that we already face in the airport. Creating new problems and limiting our ability to deal with current ones is an idea that we need to put on hold permanently. If the county insists on discussing this issue in greater detail, my response would be to demonstrate how the county is going to fix its current challenges before taking steps that could possibly lead and will most likely lead to creating new ones. In closing, I wanted to add, I believe that airline operators, the Business Council of Westchester, the MBAA, the Westchester Flying Association, and others have a really important role to play in addressing the concerns from residents that are coming through loud and clear here tonight. And I hope that they will please listen carefully and help provide creative solutions to get us out of this mess and so we can all move forward together. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The next speaker is Myra Saul. She will be followed by Jonathan Wang and Eduardo Pupo.
Good evening. My name is Myra Saul, and I have been a Westchester resident for 28 years. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Privatization of the county airport puts the fundamental tenets of the relationship between the county and its residents in jeopardy. Simply put, that takes the public and public officials at a decision-making process when it comes to the airport. Instead, we'll have an entity whose sole motive would be money. As Debbie Porter stated, the current management company owes a fiduciary duty to the county for these services. It is compensated. In the parlance of today, the county's interests and the management company's interests in the operation of the airport are aligned. As indicated also before with privatization, the interests of the parties will probably never be aligned. Some may say, well, why not just put fiduciary duty language in any lease between the county and the private party? In other words, create a hybrid contract that would change the legal relationship between the parties. That solution defies common sense and creates a host of legal issues that will inevitably be costly to the county in uncertainty, delays, and or litigation for many years to come. What are typical situations in the commercial world that are governed by a fiduciary duty? This is technical, but please bear with me. One typical situation is a trustee to a trust. Banks often act as trustees, and they usually charge significant fees, which reflect the fact that they have a higher level of legal responsibility as a trustee than in the usual banking relationship. Another situation is the Employment, Retirement, and Income Act of 1974, a federal statute which governs relationship between private employers and various pension plans. Employers have a fiduciary duty in the management of the assets of these plans. The history of the statute is littered with litigation regarding the extent of what encompasses this fiduciary duty. A third situation has been winding its way among regulatory agencies and the courts for the last 8 years and has yet to take effect. The question in this third situation is whether financial firms should have a fiduciary duty in connection with their dealings with individuals on the sale of securities. This fiduciary rule is being fought tooth and nail by financial firms, which see the new rule as limiting their profits. So what are the takeaways? No one wants to be a fiduciary. The level of duty is just too high. So high that if you are a fiduciary, you usually want to be compensated for it. and it raises so many questions and new situations as to the extent of what is expected of the potential fiduciary that invites litigation. Realistically, will the county be able to secure a reputable private party if that party would be deemed a fiduciary? Would that private party have any inkling of how to act as a fiduciary when that private party's entire history to date has been only to make money? What remedies under the contract would be for the county, would the county would contain for the benefit of the county if the fiduciary duty is breached? Do I hear costly lawsuits? And then there is the money. And not that I think money is the critical consideration here. If the county does pursue privatization with the goal of having the lessee a fiduciary, then it's predictable that the private party will pay the county less than it would be paid if it were not a fiduciary. That calls into question the whole notion of why pursue privatization at all if the county cannot get top dollar. So needless to say, placing a fiduciary standard upon the other party in any privatization deal is totally unrealistic. Let's discuss transparency and redress. The county is subject to the state's Freedom of Information law. A private party is not subject to that law. The public will be in the dark as to what happens at the airport for the duration of the lease. Will that be an obligation on the lease? If so, what are we to make of that? Again, that situation invites more litigation because no one knows what that means. Finally, redress by county residents. Where do county residents go to complain about noise when they have other concerns? Will there still be an airport advisory board? If so, what role will it have? What role is left for the Board of Legislators, the county executives? Our representatives will be without a voice. And when our representatives do not have a voice, the public will not have a voice. Governance of the airport should remain in the hands of the residents of Westchester County and their elected representatives. Let's keep it simple. The county should continue its practice of delegating its duties to an agent, a management company which operates under clear, understandable standards in which the interests of both parties are in sync. Thank you.
Thank you. We are down to 4 scheduled speakers. If anybody wishes to be heard, please reach out. Let us fill out a card for you right away so we can get you on the list. If not, when we reach the end of these speakers, I'll ask again, and then we'll come to an end of the evening. The next speaker in the on-deck circle, Jonathan Wang. He will be followed by Eduardo Pupo and Roger Klepper, and then the last scheduled speaker is Ed Woodyard.
Right. Thank you, County Executive Latimer. Let's get real. The only reason there's any discussion about reducing public governance of the airport is to enable pulling money out of the airport. The airport's an important piece of Westchester County's infrastructure. It is also a major source of pollution. The airport needs to remain fully accountable to the public in order to maintain balance between the services the airport provides and the pollution it causes. Obviously, this precludes handing over governance of the airport to a private entity. However, any change that turns the airport into a profit center, whether for the county or for a private party, will almost certainly lead to expansion and a weakening of governance and accountability. Some aviation interests tonight told us that we shouldn't be afraid and to trust them not to expand. To them I say, show us you deserve our trust. Show us you deserve our trust when Delta schedules 2 flights every day in violation of their curfew at 5:50 and 6:15 a.m. Show us you deserve our trust when you fly over our heads at all hours of the day and night, harming our health with jet exhaust and violating our right to the quiet enjoyment of our homes. Show us you deserve our trust when over 500 operations, takeoffs, and landings happen on Memorial Day, usurping our liberties on the day we are supposed to celebrate those who defended them. The airport would grow tremendously if operated as a for-profit entity. Aviation interests have continually pushed for more development and more traffic at the airport. They know that federal law precludes the county from being able to enforce any restrictions on air traffic, what kind of planes fly, where they fly, when they fly. Just since 2016, private charter airlines FlexJet and NetJets have secured new hangars under 30-year leases. Millionaire built a new terminal and a hangar to add 78,000 square feet of space without an environmental review. They claimed dubiously that this would reduce the number of flights. However, you won't find that promise anywhere in their lease. This year, NetJets and Textron tried to open a regional maintenance facility by sneaking it past our government as a routine lease assignment. Millionaire has tried to build yet another 80,000 square foot hangar while claiming that the county withholding approval would be unreasonable. A profit motive for our government would create powerful incentives for expansion to increase revenue and for cost cutting on security or environmental protections. Every budget shortfall and every tax increase could be easily addressed by allowing more traffic and more profits at the airport. It would be tempting to short-sightedly allow a little bit of growth each year. But as the traffic ratchets up, it wouldn't be long before our communities would be transformed even more with intolerable noise, traffic, and air pollution. Or even worse, we could be faced with a serious problem at the Kensico Reservoir. It would be one thing if airlines respected the curfew or didn't fly loud aircraft over our homes. But federal laws against local regulations on air traffic make Westchester Airport like a stretch of highway that our police cannot patrol. If we want cars on the highway to slow down, we have to take other measures. We not only refrain from widening the highway, we might keep the lanes narrow. Maybe we make the highway winding and turn a lot. Maybe we take our time fixing potholes. Similarly, we have to be extremely careful with every capital project at our airport. It only takes a moment of weakness to dismantle the policies that keep Westchester Airport somewhat small. The terminal use regulations are an important tool in limiting the 10 to 15% of traffic that uses the airline terminal. However, they only exist because they are grandfathered under federal law. It is possible that any change would invalidate them entirely. Typical leases for facilities catering to private jets last 30 years. Lease provisions directly limiting private traffic are likely unenforceable under federal law. For decades, Westchester County Airport has operated as a private-public partnership, but one where neither the private operator nor the county benefits from increasing profits at the airport. Changing this dynamic would open a Pandora's box of bad incentives that would drive expansion and reduce accountability, regardless of whether the entity responsible for governance changes. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Eduardo Pupo, and followed by the last two scheduled speakers, Roger Klepper and Ed Woodyard.
Hi.
We have folks outside who'll take additional names. If you'd want to just make sure we get a card, and you'll go next on the list.
Nice to see you again.
Good to see you again.
Nice to see you again. And for those of you who were not in our last meeting, you lost a fantastic meeting. It was a fantastic opportunity to discuss so many different things about a master plan. I have only 2 points. First, I believe that slide, one of the very first slides that you shared with us at the beginning of this presentation, you showed us 3 different governance models or governance scenarios, didn't you? And I believe that by what we discussed and what you heard tonight, I believe that the message that we are trying to convey in all different shapes and forms, and even now through me with my charming foreign accent, is that we don't want you to lose and to give away control. And for those three scenarios outlined in your slide, I believe that only 2 achieved their goal. Those 2 on the left side of the slide, the one that calls for total control and operation by the county, or the current one, owned by the county, and somehow I like to use the expression outsourced. The operation, the day-to-day operation is outsourced, but the management company reports to you. The far left, that I believe is the whole. Thank you. That means that you're really paying attention and helping me out here. Thank you very much. The far right really calls for what is today is in the master plan, and what is today, or at least last year, has been proposed by the former administration, if I'm not mistaken. So one very positive, clear message for achieving the purpose of tonight's meeting. Let's forget about this idea of the lease. There are so many different bad aspects that were highlighted from many of the previous speakers. We have to forget that. I would like, though, to propose another consideration in your decision-making process, why you should forget that, why you should choose for a government model that gives you control. And allow me to repeat a comment that I made last Monday, which is, in your decision-making process, I believe that there is a very important criteria that cannot be ignored, is wait a second, let's take the helicopter view here, and let's think about what is the mission, what is the vision that we have for the airport. Because if we really think that our airport is a fantastic asset that the county owns, and if we want to make money and if we want to monetize that asset, it doesn't matter what kind of control you have through this governance model, because you're going to follow that vision. Just like some people just said, I mean, if the idea is for the county to see the airport as a cash cow machine or just for a profit center, we will still have the same problems. So I would like to invite all of you, especially the legislators that we have here tonight. I think that there are 17 of you, right, to make that decision. So please, I would like to kindly invite you to meditate about the decision-making process and not lose sight of this important objective. I mean, we have this airport. Somebody used the expression, it's a special airport. It is, but not because we want to turn this airport as a new LaGuardia North. I mean, because it's a small airport, because we have only 4 gates, because it is what it is, it seems that we were trying to strike a balance between operating a major hub of transportation for the region and keeping the peace and tranquility of people that live in the surrounding areas. Now, I have, and I'm sorry, I am not here to comment anybody's comments here, but I've heard some interesting things, like it's a very valid proposition. Last thing, I even heard about people coming up with a ratio of job generation, that, you know, an airport would generate, you know, 1, but et cetera. And I've just been reminded that I have 1 minute, I'll have 60 seconds now, 59 to be precise. Hospitals have a much better job generation ratio than an airport operation has, believe me. And in any event, let's try to keep that in mind. And second, I've heard, again with my charming accent, that, help me here, if it ain't broke, doesn't... Exactly. Well, I'm afraid after all we heard here, it's already broken by these 250-80 flights in Memorial Day that some of my neighbors have reported here, and by this continuing increasing volume in noise and very, very legitimate concerns with pollution and et cetera. It seems that we already have a problem, not to mention general aviation itself. So a lot of tasks is in front of you, but I think that if the purpose today is to think about governance, I think that I have to stop and say, let's keep control for all the reasons, including following the vision and mission that we have for this airport. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Latimer, and thank you, everybody. And I also want to thank, I'm a resident of Newcastle, and importantly, I haven't been as close to this issue as many of my friends and neighbors, and I really want to thank all of them, because I, nowhere near as informed as they are, I'm able to come here and speak. Meanwhile, they have put in a tremendous amount of work engaging you and informing us about all of these issues, and very appreciative of all of that. At the very beginning, I think her name was Millie, she spoke, and clearly taking a very unpopular position in terms of some of the aspects of the airport that, I guess she was a business owner with a long connection to the airport, and a lot of the aspects of the airport that needed to be modernized, and certain things in her perspective. What I can't understand, and it's very confusing to me, and me not as an aviation expert but as someone who goes to many airports over time, is why is some third-party ownership the answer to that? I go to many airports around the country, and I think we've got examples, people have given the examples of third-party ownership where that's failed. So no need in talking about that. But how about the many airports that you go to around the country? You look at, and how many times have you gone to some small airport and you've said, my God, what a great airport that was, right? And this is not rocket science we're talking about here. This is running an airport. And somehow government entities manage to do that in other locations. I have to think Westchester County is capable of doing this. And, you know, I think, you know, the title of the presentation when you talked about is governance. Really what we've talked about here is privatization. It's not governance, right? It's a question of whether to privatize the airport or not, right? And
you're expressing your opinion and you're entitled to it, but I'll be happy to respond when you're complete.
no, I understand. No, and I'm not being argumentative in any way.
I'll interrupt you. I redefined it as governance because privatization is what you have already. You have a private entity that operates it. It is privatized by any standard definition. It is not run by government employees. I believe the attachment of the word privatization makes people misunderstand that what we're really talking about is the changing of the governance, who governs, who controls. That's why I use that phrase. Now, again, you're entitled to an opposite point of view. I just wanted to be clear. My predecessor called it privatization. It may be embedded in the federal government's language. I don't care. To me, it's a change in governance. And if we don't understand it on that level, privatization sounds like something you can do. You might privatize your garbage service, but this is a change in who decides. That's why I changed the language. Okay. I apologize for interrupting you. Take him off the clock. We'll let him ratchet back to his full time.
Wow. Thank you. Okay. So maybe when I think about it, it's more of a function of a decision regarding ownership. And I'm not going to sort of replace governance. Okay, we can talk about semantics some other time.
A couple of beers, we can do that.
Yeah. So make it a question of ownership. Okay. But like I said, I mean, I think one suggestion would be to look at other airports that do, you know, non-third-party ownership that do it successfully. You know, what are they doing? Now, I also think when we think about what's happened here, and I think the complaints going back to Millie once again, hopefully that was her name. I don't think it's a stretch to think about the prior administration in the county that there was at some level there was predisposition to the model of third-party ownership that when they came in. And what do you think when that happens, what do you think happens to the management, to the governance of the airport? Basically, what happens is basically what I think we've all gotten, and what you're seeing reflected in all of this is neglect. What incentive as a governing entity do you have to invest, to be fully invested in a long-term plan of a certain form of governance that does not involve third-party ownership when that is what you had planned to pursue all along? So basically what we're seeing here is the byproduct of neglect. And the opposite of neglect is governance. So instead of thinking about what form of governance in terms of third-party ownership or retaining ownership in the county, how about just plain governance, period? And managing the airport in an effective manner that is mindful to the interests of the community. If there's a need, I think Millie once also mentioned the need for capital investment. Capital investment, fine. You can issue bonds. You can put a proposal. If it makes sense, we are a smart county. If that is the most effective means of managing the airport, then certainly that's something that can be considered. Third-party ownership there's no magic elixir in that in terms of effectively managing this airport. And the only reason we're all here discussing it is because of the process that we went through from the last administration. So I think much better to get back on the path that every other community does with respect to the airport, and we can have an airport that we're proud of.
Thank you very much. Our last two speakers scheduled are Ed Williard. Thank you for waiting, and I apologize for bumping you to the end.
No, George. I mean, what I was going to do is Earl had asked me to speak for him, and he said just repeat what Billy Weaver said, and that was what his big deal was. But I was thinking about something when you were talking about the county having this special, basically, trust fund that it would the money would come in and it would oversee the operations and with the improvements that would be required by the airport. I think you need to look at the history of the Highway Trust Fund and how that was rated. And because it was rated to pay for X, Y, and Z, we have this problem now about getting new bridges and potholes, and why we have this request for billions and billions of dollars for all the infrastructure repairs. If that had been untouched, that money would have been there, and then there wouldn't have been a problem. I mean, that's my 2 cents for the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. The last scheduled speaker is Joyce Shapiro. If there's anyone else who wishes to speak, identify yourself. You'll be up after Ms. Shapiro. If there is no one after Ms. Shapiro, we'll wrap it up and appreciating everybody's time.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I've worked in the private equity industry for most of my career, and one thing I can say is that alignment of interest is what is critical. And what I can tell you is that the likes of an Oaktree and a Macquarie, who their constituents are investors. So these are people who buy their shares. They're both traded on the public exchanges. Macquarie is an Australian company by origin. And what their motivation is, a quarterly basis to provide returns to their investors. That's very contradictory to a 40-year lease whose constituents are residents. So right there is a huge dissonance in terms of trying to figure out how to make certain that a private partnership between someone like a Macquarie or an Oaktree Capital can be consistent with the needs of your constituents. So right there is, and the fact that also Macquarie jumped into this, not asked, is very, very telling. Because these are essentially, a private-public partnership is a financing tool. And it's used to create returns, to create income, to create an equity capital source. And as the prior gentleman said, there are many other ways of creating that opportunity, such as creating a bond. I mean, the old traditional way of just issuing bonds for the airport. We're saying it's such a jewel, as I keep hearing everyone say. So that's one thing that I think is really critical to be thinking about, that the dissonance of these types of structures. The other thing is that you had the, everyone's been talking about the right side of the chart. I'm going more to the left side in terms of government owned and operated. If you look at just globally what's been happening now, cities and states have been taking more control of their resources and controlling them and directly operating them themselves. And I think that's something that this community can absolutely take on themselves, because if there is a fee that a manager is being paid, compensated for their work, why shouldn't we monetize that ourselves and create the opportunity to do it efficiently through government ownership and operations? So I think that there are ways of doing that that can be done. So I think those are my thoughts for tonight.
Thank you very much. The next speaker just on our list has been added, Legislator Nancy Barr.
I know it's late. I just want to quickly say a couple of things. Again, thank you, Mr. Latimer, for doing this. And I think everybody needs to recognize that you're doing this because the county does have control of the airport. And that's why we have all these legislators here. That's why we have all these members of the administration. If the airport were under the control of a private entity, we would not be here. There would be no purpose for us being here. There would be nothing we could do. And in fact, you know, I would not be here right now if it weren't for the fact that the county still has control of the airport. Because people were not happy with my predecessor, who was in office for 6 years, and even though he lived right near the airport, waited until I got into the race to ever say that he would oppose the expansion of the airport. That's why he's not here. That's why I'm here, and that's why it is really important to maintain, for the government to maintain control of the airport, to have that governance ability. And the only other thing I wanted to say is that I don't know if we have, the county has on its website the video of the last meeting, but I know that Rybrook Village does. So if you didn't go to the last meeting and you want to see it, hear it, or if you want to look at it again anyway, just go to Rybrook, Village of Rybrook, and go to the, meetings, videos, and you'll see it. That's all. Thanks.
Thank you. And the website that Nancy refers to is rybrook.org, and I do believe we have it on our Westchester County Facebook page as well, but we'll try to get that communications out. Is there anyone that wishes to speak that has not spoken at this point? Going once, going twice, fair warning. Written comments are welcome to our website, our email address, email address at airport2018@westchestergov.com. So comments that you've made tonight that you want to convey in writing or by email, or any comments that you'd like to make going forward, we welcome them. It would be very helpful for us. When we met the last time, we talked about the master plan. There is an intrinsic time clock that we have to deal with because of the FAA. There is no particular time clock on whether we do anything at all or do something in the issue of governance. That is at the pleasure of the Board of Legislators and the executive branch. So your comments are welcome at any point in time as we go down the line. The next meeting that we're going to have will be 2 weeks from tonight, 7 o'clock on the 25th of June. It'll be in West Harrison at the Senior Center. I think it's on Underhill or just off Underhill. It's a parking area there. That night, we will be talking about operation issues, and that is where we will talk very specifically about altitude, flight paths, noise abatement, equipment, drainage, the PFOA issue. Our County Attorney, John Nona, will be prepared to give us an update on how we're handling that particular area of pollution, and a host of other things that might have come up between now and then. Also, we have a number of other public sessions that are going to be happening. This Saturday, we'll be continuing our coffee and conversation town hall meetings. I'll be with Legislator Kunzio at the Mount Pleasant Town Hall. I believe we're doing it 12 noon, 12 to 1:30. The following week, probably not critical for the people in this room, but Legislator Lyndon Williams and I will be in Mount Vernon. And then on the 30th, Legislator David Tubiolo and I will be together in Yonkers. By the way, this is rather unusual that an executive and a legislator together hold a town hall meeting, and it's also unusual because we're going to give you some coffee and snacks. So, as probably befits my waistline. But in those sessions are wide open, talk about any issue under the sun, but obviously these are part of the broad-based issue, so you're welcome to comment at that point in time. And then although it's not related to this issue, we do have 2 hearings coming up on Thursday, executive branch hearings on the issue of shared services, 3 to 5 at the Riverfront Library in Yonkers, and 7 to 9 at the Mount Kisco Public Library. There we will listen to input about how we try to structure shared services between county, village, town, city, and school district governments as we look at to develop a plan to share services and hopefully find some efficient and economic ways to do business. I would, first of all, want to thank again my colleagues in the executive branch, Hugh Grecian, Deputy County Executive Ken Jenkins, Joan McDonald, John Nona, and then some of our other staff folk who are here. I appreciate their time and their energy and effort to listen. We brought the full executive team to listen so that when we talk, we all have had benefit of listening in the first person to what each person had to say, and we think that's a very important situation. I want to thank Ben Boykin, who was here previously, and the members of the Board of Legislators. They may establish their own set of public discussions, open meetings. That is entirely their prerogative as legislators, so be on the lookout for that when that comes up, and how they'll decide to handle some of these issues will be outlined, and then you'll be able to comment in there. My final comment for the night, aside from Safe Home. This effort is different. I said it earlier, friend. This is different. We have tried in our brief period of time in office, and we have many major issues ahead of us. We have not decided anything on the airport yet. We haven't decided how we're going to handle Playland, a completely separate controversial issue. We have not yet finalized union contracts that have been 7 years outstanding. We have brought some issues to conclusion. The Miller House has been concluded. The The West Help site in Greenberg has come to conclusion. We're in the middle of a big discussion on Memorial Field in Mount Vernon. You may be picking that up in the newspaper. But the commitment that I have and that the rest of this team has is to listen and to deal with issues straightforwardly and to do it in public. It's not easy to do it, but we asked for these positions. I certainly did in running for office. And I think it's important to understand that what we're doing takes time. It burns your evening off, as it just has, because you've sat here to go through this process. But this is the kind of democracy that we think was missing. And we're trying to bring that into the dialogue. Now, whatever decision gets made will be a joint decision between the Board of Legislators and the executive branch. We cannot impose these decisions. The Board of Legislators will have to approve. And the Board of Legislators might determine that some proposal we make is not to their liking. So reach out to your local legislators. They're in the district all the time, whether we get into the district frequently or not. I served 13 years as a member of that board. I chaired that board. Ken served 10, 11 years as a legislator. He chaired that board. John Nona served on that board, was a mayor of his village. So you have tools to reach out. The biggest problem we have, in my judgment, as I close this off, is cynicism. What happens in government in Washington, D.C., and Albany, where I spent another 13 years of my life, has made people feel that it's a rigged game. It's all been decided. This hasn't been decided, and we're here to listen, and we'll try to make intelligent decisions. If we can reestablish faith that there's not that we have the right way, faith that the dialogue is a real dialogue, that's more important than what we actually decide on playland and the union contracts, because the biggest gap in government today is that people think the game is rigged and there's no chance, and that's the single most important thing that I want this administration to do. I want us to change the dialogue between county government and local government, between the executive branch and the legislature, between the person and the governmental entity. And that's what tonight is about more than anything else. Thank you. Safe home.